Good evening, everyone, and I'd like to open this meeting and welcome everyone to the first ordinary meeting of Council on the 27th of February 2018. Moonee Valley City Council respectfully acknowledges the traditional owners of this land, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to their elders past and present, and any Aboriginal people here today as well. I'd like to advise members of the gallery that open sessions of this meeting are being recorded and live streaming on the internet. The recording will also be archived and made available on Council's website. Gallery attendees are advised that their presence may be recorded. I'd like to remind the gallery that under the Clause 21 of the Council meeting protocols and procedures, if any visitor is called to order by the chairperson for any improper or disorderly conduct or on more than one occasion during the meeting, I may order him or her to leave the meeting room or the building. I can also request that any banner or placards that contain offensive or defamatory comments be removed from the chamber as well. I can also adjourn the meeting at a disorderly meeting. To ensure all community members have an equal opportunity to contribute, disruptive behaviour will not be tolerated. Councillors, do we have any apologies for tonight's meeting?
Mr Mayor, I just wish to advise that I have to leave at 9:45 this evening.
Sure, thank you, Councillor. Councillors, next agenda item is item 3, confirmation of minutes. Councillors, do I have a mover and a seconder for the confirmation of minutes of the ordinary meeting held on Tuesday the 13th of February? Councillor Marshall.
Yes, happy to move that the minutes be accepted.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Boone. Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to the item?
No.
Councillor Boone? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour?
Mr Mayor, if I could just speak to the minutes, you were looking at the two.
Oh,
Sorry, it's been put, the motion.
I've already put it to the vote.
I'm sorry, who's the Mayor here? I'd just like to ask.
I've already put it to vote.
I know, but you didn't even request any other councillors to speak to the motion,
I did.
to the minutes.
So does anybody else want to speak?
No, you didn't.
Okay, so
can we just have that recorded?
No, sorry, just a point of clarification, Mayor. When the motion's been put, as you put the motion, then that's the end. That signals the end of debate. So that's correct?
Correct.
My understanding is correct, so thank you.
So I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? Carried unanimously.
So, sorry, people abstained, do they?
You're abstaining? Okay. All right, all those in favour?
Councillor Sharp, Councillor Nation, Councillor Marshall, Councillor Sypek, Councillor Byrne and Councillor Cusack.
All those against? All those abstaining?
Councillor Gauchi-Marici and Councillor Lawrence. Apologies, Councillor Serace.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is number 4. Declarations by councillors. Does any councillor have a conflict of interest in any of the items on the agenda tonight? Councillor Nation.
Yes, I report I have an indirect conflict of interest in item 9.2 on tonight's agenda due to the receipt of an applicable, 9.1 on tonight's agenda due to the receipt of an applicable gift as per section 78C of the Local Government Act. As per last meeting, I will reiterate that unfortunately due to conflicting advice from various governance officers at this council, the current position of our governance officer is that attendance at the particular event in question is not considered reasonable hospitality, nor did I attend in an official capacity, and as such I'm erring on the side of caution with this matter by declaring an indirect conflict of interest and will remove myself from the chambers when this item is heard.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Any other councillor?
Yes, Mayor. I'd also like to declare an indirect conflict of interest for reasons given in writing to the CEO, again for the applicable gift registry under item 78C of the Local Government Act, for invitations I've received in my role as Mayor and Councillor at Moonee Valley Racecourse, and I'll also be absent for item 9.1 when it comes up.
Any other councillor? Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to record indirect conflict of interest to item 9.1, the receipt of an applicable gift, and also a 9.13 community facility management policy update due to a conflicting duty. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I will declare a conflict of interest in 9.1. It's an indirect conflict of interest due to my attendance at a race meeting late last year in my capacity as councillor. I also must declare a direct conflict of interest in 9.16, Union Road Business Precinct special rate due to my workplace.
Thank you. Any other councillor? Councillor Cusack.
I can't tell whether it's working, Mayor. I have to declare a conflict of interest in relation to 9.1. I have an indirect conflict as I attended a race meeting in September 2016 at Moonee Valley Racecourse, and in line with 78C of the Local Government Act, it is a matter is an issue. Oh God, I can't remember the wording.
That's right.
But that's my declared conflict.
No problems. And I also do declare as well on 9.1 of receiving the political gift in regards to the racecourse. So we go to the next item, presentations. Councillors, do we have any presentations this evening? No. I will like to just, it's not a presentation, but just something just for everyone just to understand what's going on. Last Friday, I was pleased to welcome Councillor Antonella Chelly and David Gill from the Mornington Peninsula Shire to Moonee Valley to take a look at our successful bee program that we've had been going. The councillors were impressed by the strength and innovation of the project and asked me many questions about how the project had been implemented so quickly. There's also been much interest from the Rotary clubs to work with councils on the hive management that we have, and we are working towards our vision of making Victoria a bee-friendly state, hoping that all other councils in Victoria, hopefully Australia, all come on board and save bees rather than exterminating them and rehoming them. To that end, the Mornington Peninsula said it would be supportive of a notice of motion that I'm proposing to put to the MAV and to the ALGA, to the Australian Local Government Association, in May, and I understand there'll be a report coming back to council about this in the next few weeks. The Minister for Local Government, Marlene Carews, is also very keen to come and see us, and she will be visiting us on the 15th of March, and she's looking very much forward to our bee program as well. So we've now actually got ministers coming to our municipality, which is fantastic. I'd like to thank the council staff, particularly Naomi and Pedro, who have been the driving forces behind this, and with Chris, their manager, who's been also a great force to helping this all come to fruition. And I received an email, a letter today from the Mornington Peninsula requesting us would we be interested in becoming a bee sister city with them, because eventually we're going to run out of room space for a lot of these hives, and they say they've got plenty of room down there, so if we get overwhelmed with bees, they're quite happy to adopt some of our bees if we get overwhelmed. Thank you. Petitions and joint letters. Councillors, do we have any petitions or joint letters? No? Questions from the public. Now we'll move to questions from the public, and I've got a question that was asked of me, so I'll read it out first. And following the previous Ordinary Council meetings, I have a question from Angelo Baronessa. Is Angelo in the gallery? Anyway, well, if he's not in the gallery, I'll still read out his question. Following the previous Ordinary Council meetings, can the Mayor explain why he used his casting vote and why he voted not to proceed with legal action during the last Ordinary Council meeting? Under Council's meeting procedures, if a vote on a matter is tied, the chairperson or the Mayor has a second or a casting vote, which essentially breaks the deadlock. This is common practice in all councils and boards all over the country. I must reiterate that in considering my position on this particular matter that was before council, I listened to both sides very, very carefully of the debate and considered the information provided in the council officer's report. As Mayor, I used my casting vote not to pursue any legal action on this matter due to the significant risk of cost and liability it would put on every single ratepayer in the city of Moonee Valley. Not just a proportion, but every single one of us, including myself. The CEO and I have recently met with the Public Transport Minister Jacinta Allen at Parliament House to seek a commitment on a raft of safety and amenity improvements for the Buckley Street level crossing removal project and to achieve the best outcome for the community. We had a productive meeting with the Minister and we expect to see action across a number of immediate and long-term issues we have raised. We made it clear that if the road under rail is to go ahead, then this community must be assured that the safety of the traders in Russell Street and Rose Street and Buckley Street will also be supported. They must make the transport impact assessment available to the whole community. Traffic lights must be installed at the dangerous Shamrock Street and Grice Crescent intersection on Mount Alexander Road. Access to the train platforms at Essendon Station must be made accessible in compliance with the Disability Discrimination Act, which means a raised platform which will allow disabled people to get onto the trains much more easily. And we also want a commitment that the Park Street and Puckle Street level crossings will be removed in the future to the community. Thank you. Mr Martinez, do you have some questions?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've got two... Sorry, Mr Mayor. I have two questions from Michael Hulse of Ben Street. So I think Michael's with us tonight in the gallery. Thank you for those questions, Michael. The current state of having 6 councillors ineligible to vote on Moonee Valley Racecourse development due to being compromised by accepting hospitality is not acceptable. However, why is Council considering using the existing development assessment panel, in brackets a closed-door meeting, that does not allow the 3 councillors who have been elected to represent the people of Moonee Valley to participate in decisions they were elected to make? The second question is, as this is the largest development in Moonee Valley over the next 15 to 20 years, why are Council not forming a public panel that comprises 3 eligible councillors and independent legal and planning representatives to make the decision on this matter? I'll respond in a consolidated response to both those questions, Michael. Pardon?
Sorry, as this is on the agenda, are we allowed to have this as public question time?
There was some discussion today with Mr Holtz about that. So we had previously discussed a question that was raised with Essendon grade separation, so he asked for the same leniency to be applied to himself and we agreed to that. So normally we would not do that, but Michael has requested and he's come here tonight with that and wanted to answer those questions. So executive made a decide that we would actually answer that. So in relation to Councillor Byrne, the matter is coming to Council tonight and I do not want to preempt any decision Council may make in relation to this matter. Future applications for Moonee Valley Racecourse development will be processed through the statutory planning process, which makes no requirement for the establishment of a public panel. The Planning and Environment Act 1987, specifically section 61 of that Act, provides for only the responsible authority, the Moonee Valley City Council in this instance, to have the authority to decide on a planning application. Council also has the power under the Local Government Act 1989 to delegate this power to council officers. Various consultation panels and committees, including the advisory committee appointed by the Minister, have occurred over recent years through the planning scheme amendment process, leading to the current planning controls for the proposed redevelopment of the Moonee Valley Racecourse. These controls set out the requirements for whether a planning application would be exempt from the notice and review requirements of the Planning and Environment Act 1987. And as an example, for the activity centre zone, no third-party rights and advertising apply for the development if it complies with the requirements of the ACZ schedule. Notwithstanding this, Council will continue to inform the community as the development of this land progresses. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Mr Lancaster. Next item on the agenda is 8, and that's by reports by councillors and the Mayor. So, councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Marshall. Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Sharp.
No. Sorry, just a point of clarification. Are you going to give your verbal report?
Sorry?
Sorry, so there's a verbal report in there. Are we going to give the verbal report?
Would you like me to?
Just
Okay. I'll give you a
clarification.
Well, that's all right. To be quite honest with you, I had a very busy month in regards to meeting Jacinta Allen, and that'll be coming to a report to Council very shortly. I spoke about the bees. That took up a lot of time. I judged an artworks competition last Friday, which was fantastic. All the local children, local artists in the school, the Year 12 students, it's called a fireworks display, and luckily I had Councillor Serace there and Councillor Byrne, and there was some very high quality works there, which was absolutely fantastic. and I had a lot of meetings with the community members all over the place. And would you like any more, or is that enough?
Up to you.
Yes,
You're the one
no?
who's the mayor, so.
You sure? Okay, all right. I'll just leave it at that then. Thank you. Would any other councillor like to speak on the reports of mayor and councillors? Would you like to close, Councillor Marshall? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Councillors, next report is 9.1, and on tonight's agenda is on number 2B, McPherson Street, Moonee Ponds. Given the declaration of conflict of interest by many or made by the majority of councillors at item 4, council is unable to consider or discuss the application because of there's no quorum and will not maintain during the majority of councillors, otherwise being required to leave the chamber. In this statutory planning role as a responsible authority, council has an obligation to consider and decide all planning applications either at a council meeting or pursuant to delegatory authority. To fulfil its obligation, I now ask if someone is prepared to move and another councillor second that this application be decided under delegation.
Thanks, Mayor. Mayor, I'd like to move that council resolves that planning permit application number MB 567/2016 be decided under delegation, and 2 resolves that the Development Assessment Panel meeting at which the application is to be heard be open to members of the public.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Cusack. Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to the item?
Look, I will, and I firstly want to make the point that I certainly won't be talking about the position of individual councillors. That's not my place, and I also won't be talking about the merits of the application because I obviously don't have a conflict, but I'm certainly mindful that I'm not compromising other councillors by talking about the merits. But I think when things like this happen, and I understand that this is the first time this has happened, that we do owe some sort of explanation. And I mean, this is a matter now that has certainly preceded my time on council, and I think has probably been going on, hitting 7 or 8 years now. And I think we would all acknowledge that it's very disappointing that this is a position that we find ourselves in. And so, again, this is just about providing some explanation. As has been indicated in the motion, we are the responsible authority, so the decision has to be made by council, and it's going to be made by the Development Assessment Panel. Usually DAP meetings aren't open to members of the public, but I think in the circumstances it's reasonable entirely that this particular DAP meeting will be open to members of the public so that they can come along and they can hear how the decision in relation to this application will be made. As I said, I think it's disappointing that we're here, and when these types of things happen, I think for me you need to use them as learning opportunities, and it's about taking responsibility as councillors for where we are, but it's about learning too, and I think there are a whole range of things we can do, and I've got my notice of motion tonight, later on tonight, which is looking at continuing to improve governance in Moonee Valley. We are having the Gibson hospitality policy come to us as a group of councillors in the coming months, and certainly for me I will be pushing a just say no policy, and that the starting position should be that as councillors, when we are offered these sorts of gifts, that we just say no. But that obviously is a discussion that we will all have at a later date. So I think, look, that's probably all that's appropriate for me to say. And I do acknowledge the disappointment of the community who have put large amounts of time and large amounts of resources into the matter, and as has obviously the applicant too. So we are where we are, and sometimes you've just got to deal with the circumstances best you can.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cusack, would you like to say a few words? And you can remain seated.
Thank you. Just quickly to support the motion. As stated previously, the council has a responsibility to address this particular matter in front of it, and it needs to actually have an instrument by which it can do that. So this motion simply provides that opportunity. The part 2 of the motion is a deviation from previous practice, and certainly does open it up to our community to be present and witness what's being discussed. Also, we have in front of us the actual officer's report that the community is able to look at. Just in respect of how people have got to this point, the complexity of the whole of the Moonee Valley Racing Club redevelopment, as has been pointed out on a number of occasions, is that it's not just something that has a number of buildings on it and so on like that, but its complexity has been developed over a course of a long 7-year period, where this council has worked very, very hard to ensure the community is part of it, and that I'm sure that when people have accepted, and certainly in my case, when I accepted the opportunity to attend a race meeting in September 2016, which wasn't the Cox Plate, I didn't do so on the basis of what the development was about, but more on the basis that this is a major employer in our municipality, employing several hundred people at any one time, and it has significant replicated across the community through its other activities and so on like that. So it is an important, not from just a racing perspective, but also what it adds to the community. The changes that occurred in the Local Government Act have roped in the fact that attending a race meeting by invitation of the club contravenes or is part of that whole notion of conflict, and that's what has led us to this point. So the opportunity to resolve this, get it sorted, and to provide a mechanism for the community to be involved, and also to address this particular planning issue this is an obvious way forward.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor like to say a few words? Councillor Nation.
I will just briefly, and obviously knowing the constraints of what we can say in regards to the particular application, but as the third and final ward councillor to speak, I personally am mortified and embarrassed that as a ward councillor, this part of the Local Government Act now renders my involvement in particular matters revolving around the Moonee Valley Racecourse futile. I like other councillors around the chambers, who I won't name, did gain advice in regards to attending particular events to ensure that our attendance, particularly as a ward councillor, was compliant with the Act and would not invalidate our ability to vote on any matters regarding the Moonee Valley Racing Club. And that advice was provided.
Councillor, best if we don't speak about staff or because we're only going to speak to the item.
I am speaking to the item of why I can't speak to the item.
Yeah, but there's nothing to mention about staff.
So I can't refer to advice that I was given.
Staff.
I'm not criticising staff. I'm referring to advice given to me. Now you're saying that that's a criticism because you're saying the advice is now incorrect. So if I need to be able to justify why I cannot vote on this matter, as per last meeting, I want to make it explicitly clear that there are members of us, there are councillors sitting around the table that were given verbal and or written advice that attending said events or one event was considered reasonable hospitality.
So at the end of the day, it's still your decision on whether you've got a conflict or not.
Councillor Sypek, may I speak without being interrupted?
I'm not interrupting you, I'm just saying I don't want you to criticise the staff.
I'm not criticising staff. I'm relaying feedback that was given to me in regards to whether or not attending such an event would be deemed a conflict of interest.
Okay, I'll give you permission.
Thank you. I'm glad I've got permission to speak to the gallery and as a councillor. In regards to attending in official capacity, the advice given to me was that I was attending in an official capacity because I was identified as a councillor and also was part of official proceedings in being named at the event and was identifiable as a councillor. As I said 2 weeks ago, that advice has since changed and therefore puts many of us in a very upsetting position that we have let down our community. And Mayor, I have no shame in saying that I have sought advice both internally and externally to ensure that I do the best possible job I can as a councillor, and that advice has changed through the numerous governance officers we have had here at council.
Thank you. Any other councillor? Councillor Marshall, would you like to close?
I'll just close by saying that I think probably the debate tonight has highlighted again that if we have a just say no policy, these arguments and discussions are avoided. And it's around that issue of perception as much as anything else, and that's why I think that when that gifts and hospitalities policy comes up, we can nip this issue in the bud and never have this council or another council have to face the issue again.
Thank you, councillor. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Oh, councillor Sharp's not. Yeah, sorry, it's not here. Okay, unanimous. Yep. Sorry. Carried unanimously. Next item is 9.2, and it's on page 39, entitled 7 Etzel Street, Airport West. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillors. Councillor, we're discussing 9.2, 7 Etzel Street, Airport West, and I've called for a motion. Councillor Marshall.
I move a motion in the form of the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Sharp. Councillor Marshall.
Mayor, I understand in areas where these types of subdivisions are happening that it can be a very sensitive issue. But again, we need to be looking at what the particular planning rules that apply to that site say. And in this instance, there have been some proposals which I think are designed to address some of the concerns of some of the objectors. And there was certainly some concern in relation to one of the rear, or two of the rear neighbours, as to any potential impact on their property of this development. And I think that the way that it currently sits, that for the most part those concerns have been addressed, or they've certainly been addressed in a way which is a balancing act, which I acknowledge can sometimes not satisfy everyone. Also, there was some concern in relation to the impact on the streetscape, and again, this is probably what would be considered to be a balancing act of balancing the interests of all parties concerned, and certainly being mindful about what has already happened in the street. So I think, again, we've got to be careful around that issue. You'll notice that, again, the Res Code assessment indicates that for the most part it complies, or in the areas where it doesn't, really it has been able to be conditioned in a way which actually ensures that it complies. And certainly those issues around overlooking are ones that, when you've got some subdivisions that have already occurred, that people are very concerned about, and that is one that is able to be conditioned in this instance. And as I said, on balance, certainly I can understand some concerns around the neighbours, but we also know very clearly how these usually play out if they are refused, and sometimes it comes down to that situation that you are better off trying to address some of the issues of concern via conditions rather than saying, no, refuse it outright. It ends up in the tribunal and you may end up with a worse outcome. And I suspect that if this was one that was refused, that would be most likely what would happen.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just I concur with Councillor Marshall in her comments regarding this proposal. Could I please just ask for a point of clarification from
Mr. Barry.
Manager, Mr Barry, if that's okay. Can I just ask just to confirm that the conditions before us relate to the amended plans that have been submitted?
Mr Mayor, that's correct. The first condition, condition 2A, reflects the new plans that have been submitted with council. So the conditions imply that those new plans are the plans that have to be approved, recommended for approval.
Amended plans are in 2A.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Would any other councillor like to speak? Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've been tearing my hair out about this one for quite a while. To give people a bit of background, we've got 534 square metres. The applicant has put in for 2x4 bedrooms side by sides with 4 car spots. There's a bit of an issue with the setback. Basically, it was due to various reasons. There was quite a few objections. There was approximately 30. When Councillor Sarace and I went into a meeting with the objectors and the applicant, there was a suggestion of bringing the whole of the development forward, and that was very pleasing for some objectors, particularly the ones that were on Clydesdale Road. However, it didn't please a lot of objectors in other areas in Airport West, due to neighbourhood character and how that could significantly, in their words, destroy the neighbourhood character. When this has now come back, it has been, the dwellings have been moved forward halfway between their two neighbours, which generally speaking is acceptable. However, in saying that, I believe there possibly could have been more objections had these plans actually been advertised. They'll never advertised in terms of what it would do to the neighbourhood character and in terms of the setback. And because of that, I can't be supporting this motion. I do agree with Councillor Marshall that if we had this at VCAT, that there wouldn't be a lot of success to it. I would have been conditioning to delete 2A and to reduce the overall length of the first floor, being the upper level, to ensure that the overshadowing and overlooking at the properties on Clydesdale Road were reduced, the same as to what the setbacks were.
Sorry, Mayor, just as a point of clarification, is Councillor Byrne suggesting she'd like to amend the motion to include those conditions?
I can foreshadow a motion, or it would be a formal amendment.
You can ask to move it for a formal amendment.
If I can move a formal amendment?
Yep, I'm happy for that to be.
Amendment?
Yes.
Okay.
Excuse me, Mr Mayor, if it's a formal amendment, it needs to be seconded by others than those who put forward the original.
Okay. As we have a motion for a formal amendment by Councillor Byrne, do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Sharp. Sarace, sorry.
Can I please ask what is the formal amendment?
Sure. Councillor Byrne.
So the formal amendment would be deleting item 2.A in terms of reducing the setback and then adding an extra condition in that the first floor level be reduced by that it was brought forward for in 2A. Is that clear enough?
Yes. No?
Mr
Barry, would you be able to clarify it for us?
Mr Mayor, I'm not exactly sure what the intention of the amendment is. Apart from removing 2A, which is the amended plans, that they not be on the table anymore, and I understand that there's a proposal to amend the top floor, but the quantum of that hasn't been given.
So if I can clarify, so the amended plans were bringing the dwellings forward how far?
By approximately 1.5 metres. The entire dwelling was moved forward, but there were also setbacks on the western boundary that were increased.
Yes.
in terms of the
So
amendment?
the total to be, if it was 1.5 metres, then the total of the first floor to be reduced by the 1.5 metres.
The entire dwelling, through you, Mr. Mayor, wasn't reduced in size by 1.5 metres. It was moved forward towards Etzel Street by the 1.5 metres. The size of the dwelling itself may perhaps have been reduced by 30 or 40 centimetres with some.
Can I just ask that we adjourn the meeting, please?
Adjourn the meeting. I'll adjourn the meeting for 5 minutes just to get this clarification, just to make sure. So, in 5 minutes' time, guys. Councillor Byrne, can you please read out your amendment?
Hi, thank you. I'd like to move a formal amendment of the deletion of condition 2A, and I'd like to add the additional condition of the first floor to be reduced by 1 metre.
Thank you, Councillor. Do I have a seconder for that? Do I have a seconder? No seconder. It's lost. It lapses. So we revert back to the original motion. So Councillor Marshall spoken, Councillor Sharp spoken.
Sorry, Mr Mayor, am I allowed to continue what I was
Yes,
speaking
you are.
on?
Yes.
Thank you. So although my formal amendment didn't get up, I'd like to say that at least I tried to stand up for the residents of Airport West. I don't believe in ruining neighbourhood character. I think there could have been and should have been a really good outcome for this development, and I think that it's a shame that it's not happening. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillor? Councillor Cusack.
I would like to seek an amendment to the motion, if it's okay with the mover, and that is to add a 2K, that an asbestos report be provided.
Councillor Cusack, it's an informal alteration, I think, what you're asking for. Yes.
Yeah.
Informal alteration?
Well, I'll need to hear what it is, but I'm sure it will be an informal alteration.
So it'll be a 2K, that an asbestos report be provided to the responsible authority 30 days before construction, specifying if there is any requirement to take remedial action in case asbestos is found.
Thank you.
I don't know. I'd have to find a seconder, I suppose, for that.
Now, it's fine.
You're okay.
It's an informal. Yes. Would you like? Can you answer that for us, Councillor?
Under our meeting protocol, informal amendments are, by their nature, they're certainly not defined very clearly in our meeting protocol, but they are considered to be relatively minor or editorial amendments to the motion. Those that are considered formal amendments and need to be moved and seconded by councillors other than those who put forward the originating motion, they're considered to be of a more substantive nature. My view would be that Councillor Cusack's addition here is more than just editorial, so that it would be considered a formal amendment.
Okay. Councillor Serace will second it. Councillor Cusack, would you like to speak?
We'll debate that motion. Airport West was largely built through the 40s, 50s, 60s. A lot of the building product that was used regularly in that area was asbestos related. It was common practice for it to be throughout houses. We've just recently had a significant delay in a major project that this council undertook around the Green Spine project, and we know that there are issues with other places. There is a house that is just being demolished very close to 7 Etzel, in walking distance from it, and it's currently being covered up and asbestos is being removed from it as we speak, according to obviously the processes that are required. This is just a simple safety precaution to acknowledge the specific issues that go with houses in the Airport West area, and it's a common sense approach from our council just to ask for that report to be done. It's not a burden of any significance on the developer or the builder. It's a very simple, straightforward process that, in fact, I would have thought was best practice for any decent builder anywhere in the municipality.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Councillor Thrace.
Yes, I'll just concur with what Councillor Cusack has said, and I think safety is paramount within our municipality, so it's very important, and I think that's a great addition to this motion, and I think that that's something perhaps we should be considering in most of our applications that come forward. So thank you for bringing that forward.
Would any other councillor like to speak? Councillor Cusack, would you like to close?
No, it's simple.
Councillors, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Could you name them?
Councillor Sorais, Councillor Sharp, Councillor Nation, Councillor Marshall, Councillor Cusack, Councillor Gauci-Marici and Councillor Lawrence.
All those against?
Councillor Sypek and Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Ms Pope. Councillors, next report is 9 points.
Hang on, that was just voting for the formal amendment.
Oh.
We haven't voted on the item as yet.
Yes. I was getting lost with all these
That was a vote for the formal amendment.
Yes.
Maybe
Ms Pope, could you just explain what's going on now?
The vote has been conducted on the amendment, so that has now been carried and becomes incorporated into the substantive, which I think is up on the screen. So now we would resume the debate on the substantive with that amendment included.
Councillors, would any councillor like to speak to the item? Councillor Marshall, would you like to close? Councillors, I'll put that to the vote. Can you please read the names out, Ms Pope? All those in favour?
Councillor Sorais, Councillor Sharp, Councillor Nation, Councillor Marshall, Councillor Cusack, Councillor Gauci-Marici and Councillor Lawrence.
And those against, Councillor Sharp and Councillor Byrne.
No.
Councillor Sharp.
Those against, Councillor Sypek, Councillor Byrne.
Now can I proceed? Thank you. 9.3 on tonight's agenda is 74 Pascoe Road, Moonee Ponds. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move the officer's recommendation with some amendments, with some additional conditions.
Do I have a seconder?
Do you want me to read the conditions first?
Conditions.
Condition 1K, to introduce a stop-go signal system at the intersection of Pascoe Road to control vehicle ingress and egress. Condition 7, amended by removing the words unless with the written consent of the responsible authority at the end of the condition. New condition 8, to restrict the number of employees operating at the site to 2 employees. New condition 9, to control operating hours of the food and drink premises. New condition 27, to control music and background noise of the food and drink premises. Condition 31, amended to restrict loading and unloading to no later than 7 p.m. as opposed to 10 p.m. And new condition 32, to control the generation of noise related to waste management, specifically bottles.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Nation. Councillor Sharp, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you. Look, this proposal is on Pascoe Road, just out here actually, and it's in quite a difficult position on Pascoe Road because it's right at the intersection of Callaway Avenue and the pretty much the whole lighting, the traffic lights there. So I can understand there's extra conditions to protect the vehicles going in and out of the site. It's not ideal, but there's nothing that precludes a development occurring on this site, and that's what the problem is, I guess. We've had this proposal before us, and we have to decide on it in its form. So, with the site constraints, I think these extra conditions go a long way to addressing the issues that may arise. It is in a it's on a main road, obviously, where these high density developments are expected to occur. I do understand that there has been some upset from Thomas Street residents in particular, but with these conditions put on the development, like I said, I think it'll go a long way to protecting the amenity of the site and the amenity of the surrounding area, and the really big issue of entering and exiting the site. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sharp. Councillor Nation.
Thank you, Mayor. I obviously seconded and will speak in favour of this application, and I do so with not a great deal of enthusiasm or excitement, but acknowledging that this site does lie within our activity centre boundary, which is a boundary which we have set and therefore that we need to acknowledge. A previous application on this site was, as I believe, rightly refused for being above the ACZ height limits. This new application at 4 storeys meets the zone's preferred 4-storey height control and is within the 14-metre standard. It lies in a zone which has been identified by us as a council for higher density housing and growth. There have been some tweaks and concessions that have been made to the application to get it to this point, including ensuring the apartments have been designed in line with the new apartment guidelines. Screening has been added to prevent overlooking, and the laneway will also be widened to allow the passing of vehicles. On top of that, the conditions that Councillor Sharp has proposed as well will also hopefully reduce the impact on the overall amenity of residents in the area, particularly capping that retail operation to 7 p.m. rather than 10 p.m. I acknowledge there will be people that live around this property that will not necessarily be pleased with my support of this application, but the reality is that this property lies within the boundaries of an ACZ that we determined, and subsequently, if we do have issues with this particular development, that needs to be addressed via changes to the ACZ and not just by refusing this particular development.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Any other councillor like to speak? Councillor Cusack.
Well, I wasn't going to say any more tonight. The Uncle Dougs are knocking my brains for a sixer, but I have to say something about this particular proposal. I didn't like it when it came to us as at a consultation meeting, and I'm more and more I think about it, the less I am attached to it. The critical issues here are, at what point does all of an ACZ have to be complied with to its nth degree, and how does it actually work with the rest of the community and municipality and streetscapes and so on like that? ACZs, yes, have a lot of elasticity around them about heights and preferred styles and all those sorts of things. But when they bump up against local housing in such a remote part of the ACZ as this is, some consideration to the transition to the local community is really required here. My preferred would clearly be a 3-level building. I've seen the design layout and so on like that. I've seen the colour schemes. I note the effort to soften it. I note the timber facades, all of those sorts of things. They're important and they're good value. Where, of course, it falls down again is its interrelationship again with local community. It has a one-way out onto Pascoe Vale Road. It has a way out onto Pascoe Vale Road, which is a left-hand turn, which means that little bit of laneway, even though it's widened and all sorts of things like that, is only used by certain people coming from certain directions. There's a left way in as well, left out, left in, understand that. However, the bulk of people who will be coming into this place, when that intersection is confused by a tram stop, the traffic lights that are right above it, and a couple of busy roads running into it, are not going to necessarily use that. They will be going via Coate Street and up the long laneway that runs at the back of all of the houses in Walker Street. Now, the Walker Street people are, again, part of this ACZ world, but at this point there are a lot of lovely houses there, people who are enjoying the amenity of suburban and residential living and are not very keen to have, or shouldn't be, have this foisted upon them. Also, from a point of view of council protecting and preserving its laneways, this is an opportunity for us to actually think about what that laneway along from Coate Street could look like in the future. So I'd ask you to not support this motion. I think it has got problems. I don't think it actually fits, and it should be rejected on that basis.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Any other councillor like to say a few words? Councillor Marshall.
Firstly, I'm standing noting that this is a very difficult application, and for me this is an application which shows the importance of foresight in decision making, because we would not be standing here tonight, and in fact we wouldn't have been even talking about the racecourse if the decision had not been made to extend the boundary of the activity centre zone to include this area and to include the racecourse, and it never should have occurred. And I can tell you what, if I had been on council at the time, I would have absolutely fought to the death to make sure it didn't happen. Because who would have thought when you earmark something for high density development, that is what you get? Now, the problem is that we are stuck with the rules that, as Councillor Nation rightly pointed out, were made by council. And so when you make those rules, if you don't like them, you change them. But the difficulty we have here is that this fits very clearly within what is now a mandatory height of 4 stories. And I had a resident contact me and say that there should be that transition to 3 stories, and I agree. Again, that should have been written into the rules. But it wasn't. What was written into the rules, but this is a site where you can have 4 stories. And that is the difficulty that we face. Now, the traffic issues, again, I've got concerns with those. And that's why some of the conditions proposed by Councillor Sharp with the traffic light system, with that widening of the right-of-way, will provide some place to pass, limitations on right-hand turns out of there. One thing we can say for sure, again, as we play these things forward, thinking about how they might play out at the tribunal, is that if Vic Roads have said that this is okay, we know what will happen. The tribunal will say when it comes to that issue of traffic moving in and out of there, it is okay. And if Vic Roads had turned around and said no, then the same thing. We would very confidently be able to turn around and say, well, no, that's not right. But from my understanding, reading through the report, there has been extensive consultation with Vic Roads, and we will just be knocked out of the tribunal like that, on that grounds. Now, this refers to my earlier point too in relation to the previous application. Sometimes you are better off trying to think, all right, well, what can we do to try and minimise the amenity impacts on the surrounding neighbours? And that is why I can't actually recall a stricter set of conditions around the use of this facility than those proposed by Councillor Sharp. The limitations in terms of the number of employees, the limitations in terms of use, and the very strict hours that are being proposed. Certainly the concerns around noise are being addressed. The issue around bottles, which we sometimes find is an issue of concern for adjacent neighbours. So we can go ahead and refuse this as is. It'll head off to the tribunal without these conditions, because that will not be what's on the table, and we will most likely get an outcome that is worse than what's been proposed now through these use of conditions. As I said, for me, it is just that exercise in every time we are going down a strategic planning path to think, all right, you know what? If we earmark this for higher density development, then that is going to be exactly what we get.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Any other councillor? Councillor Sharp, would you like to close?
I think all councillors have spoken eloquently, and I agree with all points, but need to make the decision in front of us. Thank you.
Councillors, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? Oh, sorry, all those in favour? Should we read names out?
Councillor Sourace. Apologies. Councillor Sharp, Councillor Nation, Councillor Marshall, Councillor Sypek, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Gauchi-Marici and Councillor Lawrence.
All those against?
Councillor Cusack.
Thank you. Next item is 9.4 on tonight's agenda on page 96, entitled 4 Cheffers Street, Moonee Ponds. Councillors, do I have a motion?
I'd like to move 14 Sheffield Street, not 4, but
14.
the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Gauci-Marucci, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Obviously, the original proposal had a number of elements of concern which have then been addressed in the amended plans. The amended plans weren't perfect. They had a high level of compliance, but the 5 areas of non-compliance have also been further addressed through conditioning. So the resubmitted plans, along with the conditions that have been proposed, address the majority of the concerns. They include changing the design to a pitch roof in line with the neighbourhood streetscape. It looks quite similar to the 2 next to it now. The colour scheme revisions, setbacks, wall heights and window screening. So it's now compliant. Thank you.
Councillor Lawrence, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just to concur with my ward councillor Gauci-Marucci on most of those matters, there has been several conditions applied by our planning department, which is good to see, which essentially brings the application as an adequate level of compliance within the Moonee Valley planning scheme. The Res Code, and these include high level of compliance for neighbourhood character, landscaping, overlooking and private open space, parking as well. This is a corner site. It's not a side-by-side development as such, and as such it's perfect for a development of 2 units within our municipality. It's a flat site that's ideal for a smaller development, and as such suits the site in Cheffers Street and the corner of Bruce Street. I think to take the points that were made in the previous development, that should this go to VCAT, then we're open, leaving ourselves open to serious issues that could be thrown open by that application. And I think the planning department has taken the level of conditioning to the applicant that will hopefully ensure that we end up with a good development and not one that's inadequate as it originally was. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Any other councillor like to say a few words? Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I held the consultation meeting on this development, and there was actually quite a number of residents there. Where it's located on Cheffers Street there, it's a very small cul-de-sac of just a few little quiet streets, very skinny, narrow streets. And the residents have lots of concerns with parking and just the amount of traffic and just the increased volume of traffic that seems to be sort of cutting through this little part of Aberfeldy. And I do note that the developer has made some changes, and I believe that they're changes for the better. But I can't support it in its form. I'm concerned about the impact that just further condensing more houses on the one block in this small little area is having to the wider neighbourhood character just in this little pocket. There's quite a number of townhouses and units seeming to infiltrate this little part, and I do understand the residents' concerns regarding just how it's changing, and it's just changing. It's just getting more intense, and I can't support that as it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sharp. Any other councillor? Councillor Gauci-Marucci, would you like to close?
Thank you.
I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Councillor Sarace, Councillor Nation, Councillor Marshall, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Cusack, Councillor Rebecca Gauci-Marucci and Councillor Lawrence. All those against? Councillor Sharp, Councillor Sybeck. Next item on the agenda is 9.5 and is on some report on page 115 entitled 38 to 42 Scotia Street, Moonee Ponds. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Marshall.
Thanks, Mayor. I'd like to move that Council issue a notice of decision to refuse to grant a permit in relation to planning permit application MV 230/2017 for the construction of 12 dwellings, a reduction to the visitor car parking requirement and alteration of access to a road in a road zone category 1, 38 to 42 Scotia Street, Moonee Ponds, or land in strata 20307 in accordance with the following grounds of refusal. 1. The proposal fails to meet the overarching objective and strategies of clause 1501(5), cultural identity and neighbourhood character of the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme, and would result in a development that fails to appropriately respond and contribute to neighbourhood character. 2. The visual bulk, scale, form and layout of the proposal fails to meet the objectives and strategies of clause 2106, neighbourhood 1, neighbourhood character, and clause 2106(4), urban design, as it does not respect or contribute to the preferred character of the Garden Suburban 5 precinct and fails to appropriately respond to its location and surrounding context. 3. The proposal fails to satisfy the following standards contained within clause 55, 2 or more dwellings on a lot of the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme, and does not achieve an acceptable outcome in terms of the following objectives. A. Clause 55021 neighbourhood character. B. Clause 55022 residential policy. C. Clause 55031 street setback. D. Clause 55033 site coverage. E. Clause 55041 side and rear setbacks. F. Clause 55044 north facing windows. G. Clause 55045 overshadowing. The proposal represents an overdevelopment of the land. 5. The proposal will have an adverse effect on the residential amenity of neighbouring land. 6. The proposal fails to provide sufficient car parking as required under clause 5206 car parking, the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme, and would exacerbate parking problems in the surrounding area. And 7. The design of the proposed access ways and parking areas does not comply with the design standards at clause 52069 of the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme, in particular the use of vehicle turntables.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Cusack. Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you, Mayor. This is a site that has already been subdivided, and someone's already made some money out of it, and someone has now decided to try and make some more money out of it, as of course people are entitled to do. The difficulty is that this is not a site within an activity centre. This is not. It's an area that is, you've got the tram, but it's certainly not close to a railway. And this is the sort of density of development that you would actually expect to find within an activity centre boundary. It is a large site, certainly, but for me, the mass of the building as you look along the sides is just overwhelming. And I know there was some attempt to try and break it up a bit, but it doesn't get there for me. And I think in terms of the other areas of non-compliance with Res Code, again, in residentially zoned land such as this, we really need to protect Res Code where possible. So at times, the requirements of Res Code, I should say. So at times you might say, okay, well, there's a little bit of non-compliance there, a little bit of non-compliance here, and on balance, it's all right. But then you start getting to the types of applications where you think, well, you know what? The planners are proposing conditions here, conditions there. And it gets to the point where you think, is this almost getting to the point of a redesign? For me, this proposed use of turntables is a big red flag, to say the least. And the idea that you have to use a turntable to provide manoeuvrability and get cars in and out perhaps might be an indicator of the types of things that we would say would be an overdevelopment. And I think on balance that's my concern, that this is just too many dwellings, too large a sized dwellings on this block, which again, acknowledge that it is going to have multiple numbers of dwellings on there just by virtue of the fact it does already. But there gets that point where you say enough, and this is certainly at that point.
Councillor Cusack.
I just can't see this thing.
No, you're on.
Everybody else knows. Well, obviously I'm speaking in support of the motion. The problem that we have in Scotia Street, and that vicinity there is the massive traffic issues. It's not an area that is defined as an activity centre. It's defined as a bottleneck and a madness that locals just absolutely abhor. To take a place that has already been developed and subdivided once before and then continue this subdivision and to put more into the area and to create more confusion in that space seems to me to be quite nonsensical. The other big issue that has been pointed out by Councillor Marshall is the fact that it's great to use new technology to make something really work, but this is not enhancing the issue. This is about trying to hide an issue. The turntable doesn't resolve the problems with cars going in and out of the place. What it does is just an effort to use a different type of technology to address something that we all know is going to happen, and that is cars parked on the damn street. And the more people who are parking out in Scotia Street, the less opportunity for any common sense to apply with through traffic and the likes of that. I just ask people to spend 5 minutes down in that neighbourhood. It's at present it does feature a lot of lovely green leafy areas. Some of the older developments have been done respectfully. If the old six-packs of yesteryear are not very nice, the one thing they have going for them is that they were all built on relatively large blocks, and most of them have good parking and street in and off access and all that sort of stuff. This takes that away. Now, I understand the notion and the need for increased intensive building and densification of our neighbourhoods, but I'm not sure that this is exactly the place to do it. Take this sort of development, move it up towards the Moonee Ponds Activity Centre. Do it in places like that, I'm more comfortable. But to continue to say, just because it's a busy area, it's a place that can be more built out when it doesn't have any of the services or any of the opportunities for employment or the likes of that. In fact, it goes so contrary to the 20-minute city idea, it should be kicked out on that basis.
Any other councillor? Councillor Nation.
Thank you, Mayor. Not a lot more to add after Councillor Marshall and Councillor Cusack's addresses, other than to say probably one thing that they haven't harped on a great deal, and I know that is a big bugbear of all of us, is that Margaret Muir Way frontage, and a completely different dynamic to the Scotia Street, which gets all that through traffic, but Margaret Muir Way, which was originally just a laneway where people had rear access, people are now capitalising on street frontages, and it means parking, as we know and we've been advised by residents over the past few years, is very difficult. We're going to be creating more traffic movements in and out of Margaret Muir Way as well as Scotia Street. And so while the Scotia element will create some more serious implications for traffic in that area, so will that Margaret Muir Way side as well. I think the other real big red flag when you're looking at this sort of application in this location is that site coverage of 68%, and I think that is very much why they have had to introduce the lazy Susans, which I'd call the turntables, to get traffic to navigate in and out, because there is that extra 8% site coverage that you shouldn't get in Res Code, because obviously 60% is the limit. So I'm more than happy to concur with my fellow ward councillors that a refusal is appropriate in this instance.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, look, when I look at this development, the way it's got the internal driveway and the apartments on either side, we're seeing this sort of style up at the top of Buller Road, actually, and Buller Road is quite a large road that can to a degree, accommodated, although they're very, very imposing dwellings. And I note these are only 2 stories, but I'm quite happy to support the refusal that Councillor Marshall's put up, because I just don't think that it's at all going to comply with neighbourhood character or benefit the neighbourhood character. It's going to be completely out of character, and certainly not something that can be accommodated in Scotia Street, traffic-wise, let alone just residential amenity. It's just not something I would want to see down there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sharp. Any other Councillor Burt?
Hi. Although not my ward, I just wanted to add to thank you, Councillor Marshall, for putting up a refusal here. One thing that hasn't been touched on heaps is the waste. In terms of having 12 dwellings, I couldn't really find where the bins were going too well, and I think that would be a huge issue for this street and that area. So thank you for putting up the refusal.
Any other councillor? Councillor Marshall, would you like to close? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Unanimous. Next item on tonight's agenda is on page 145, and it's 421 to 431 Mount Alexander Road, Ascot Vale. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Nation.
Yes, I'll move the officer's recommendation.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Serace.
All right, speak. Yeah. Thank you, Mayor. Look, this application at 421 to 431 Mount Alexander Road is a difficult one to review, knowing the history of applications or the history of a previous application that has been applied for on that site, and knowing the context of the area and the somewhat sensitive interface with Regent Street, but also the newly built property that runs right along the western side of this site. It's in a commercial 1 zone. It does provide a lot of what we've been advocating for in that southern end of Mount Alexander Road, being some more retail premises. It includes 4, and then obviously having a somewhat adequate number of people living on top of those retail outlets to help sustain that business, those businesses. And we definitely know that more southern end of Mount Alexander Road is struggling somewhat in terms of being a retail or a functioning retail strip. A couple of the red flags with this application, and I know that councillors who may not be in favour of this application will speak to. Obviously, there's a waiver and a somewhat considerable waiver of car spaces. They are predominantly due to the retail dwellings. So the residential dwellings have, I think, a reduction of one residential spot, but the reduction of, I believe it is about 20, is to do with the retail premises and visitors to the retail premises, which obviously then in the report is justified by the fact that it is on one of our major tram arterial routes. So being a commercial 1 zone, being 2 metres above the preferred height, I acknowledge the preferred maximum height is 12 metres in that area, and it does sit at 14. And there is an issue with the setback above 11.5 metres. It fronts a little bit closer than it should. But with all things considered and reviewing the comments by the planners and by the external parties, I believe that this, and also considering what will lie beside it or does lie beside it on Regent Street, being a 3-storey strip of units that have just been built, I would think it'd be tough luck getting an outcome from VCAT that would be anything other than an approval. So it's not with great excitement that I move this application, particularly given I'm a fan of that Nando's and frequent it very often. I do hope one of those retail... No, I hope that's not a conflict of interest, but I do hope one of those retail tenancies could still be a Nando's, because I do love my Portuguese chicken.
Yes, we can see that.
Just a little bit over summer, all right? But as I said, it's that getting that balance right in that southern end of Mount Alexander Road, being sensitive enough to those residents that live off in Regent Street and the streets that run off Mount Road, but also knowing that we need to reinvigorate that end, and that is the gateway to our municipality, and possibly the introduction of some more retail premises and a respectable number of people living on site will do that. My final point is the dwelling diversity is somewhat what we strive for. I think 2/3 are two-bedders or above, so they haven't just opted for all the studio apartments, which is another small win, and probably another reason why, if it escalated or if it got refused tonight and went to VCAT, it'd be a tough job actually getting that refusal to hold.
Thank you, Councillor Thrace.
There's not a lot more that I could add to Councillor Nation's address to this application. Perhaps only just to say that this would certainly tick the box of the 20-minute right to work that Councillor Cusack mentioned earlier on the previous application. That's probably about the only thing I could add to it. But I concur with what Councillor Nation has spoken to, and I don't really have anything further to add.
Any other councillor? Councillor Nation, would you like to close? Oh, didn't see anyone's hand go up. Councillor Nation, would you like to close? Fine, okay. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour?
Councillor Thrace, Councillor Sharp, Councillor Nation, Councillor Sypek, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Galchi-Marici and Councillor Lawrence.
All those against?
Councillor Marshall, Councillor Cusack.
Thank you. Next item is 9.7 on tonight's agenda, is on page 168, as entitled Planning Scheme Amendment C182 Update Heritage Overlay 62, 64, 66, 68 Buckley Street, Essendon. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Sharp.
Move the officer's recommendation, please.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Sharp, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you. Yes, look, this application for heritage overlay over these properties 62, 64, 66 and 68 Buckley Street is vital, and we have rushed this application through to ensure that none of these dwellings are demolished and redeveloped. They are very much intact and certainly contribute to the streetscape and the heritage of Essendon and our wider surrounds. So I'm passionate about keeping our heritage retained, and I'm very, very pleased to see that this report has been pushed through so that we can get these properties protected.
Thank you, Councillor Sharp. Councillor Lawrence, would you like to say a few words?
Only to endorse what Councillor
Sharp
has just put forward, and to ensure that our heritage within Essendon is maintained at the standard that we want to retain, particularly in Buckley Street, given the current situation, and to ensure that Buckley Street remains that preeminent heritage street that it and the character that it currently has, that everyone admires and enjoys, and does not want to lose. So we might lose it down one end of Buckley Street, but we'll certainly retain it down this part of Buckley Street. So he's hoping that no further state government planning laws override it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Would any other councillor like to speak to the item? Councillor Sharp, would you like to close? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Next item is 9.8 on tonight's agenda, is on page 172. Planning Scheme Amendment C186 Update Heritage Overlay 5 Alma Street, Aberfeldy. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Lawrence.
Move the officer's report, Mr Mayor.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Sharp. Councillor Lawrence, would you like to speak to the item?
Only just, it's a similar situation to the Buckley Street one. This is a heritage listed home that, well, we're hoping it to be heritage listed, and it's a lovely old property that we'd like to see retained within our municipality, particularly in Aberfeldy. There's some beautiful homes in Aberfeldy, and this is one of the prime ones that for number 5 Alma Street needs to be retained, and we hope the Planning Minister sees fit to retain it. Thank you.
Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This property was identified in the Heritage Gap Study 2014 as having potential individual heritage significance as an interwar period dwelling of high integrity, and our Heritage Advisor raised concerns regarding the potential demolition of existing property due to its potential landmark value as an individual site. So it's of vital importance that we are able to achieve a heritage overlay over this site before any further works are done to compromise its integrity. Thank you.
Councillor Marshall.
Look, I have to stand up to speak to this because the idea that someone would seek to knock down this property to put 3 dwellings on it, it's just astonishing to me, and this is a great highlight, if you like, of the reason why we have to have heritage controls. Because if you rely on individuals to respect heritage and to respect the beauty and the history that goes along with buildings such as this, because to get individual recognition, you have to have an exceptionally high level of heritage integrity and heritage value. And the fact that someone would think that that should be a building that should be knocked down is just beyond my comprehension. And again, just highlights the importance of heritage controls, because where you rely on people to do the right thing, often they won't.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Any other councillor? Councillor Lawrence, would you like to close?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, just to reiterate that this is a vital heritage property within Aberfeldy, and one that we need to retain, not for ourselves, but for the next generation and the generation to come after that and that. And these are vital issues to Moonee Valley, and certainly vital issues to Aberfeldy, that properties such as this must be retained and must be kept for the heritage of our children, our children's children, and so forth, generations to come. So I agree with the officer's recommendation and would ask that councillors follow suit. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Council report on tonight is 9.9 and is entitled Council Plan 2017-2021 Progress Report for July-December 2017. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Gauci-Marucci. Do I have a seconder? Oh, sorry, moving the officer's recommendation? Do I have a seconder? Councillor Sorais. Councillor Gauci-Marucci, would you like to speak to the item?
I will just briefly, given it's a pretty significant body of work in there. So the current council plan has 200 actions across 19 objectives. So to have 95% of those either on track or completed is a huge achievement. Certainly for me, what I'm most proud of course, the actions that link to Moonee Valley 2040. The actions that have been completed with relation to that demonstrates some meaningful engagement with our community to determine what the next 20 years of our municipality and council plans look like. And of course as well, my portfolio covers festivals and events for a vibrant, engaged community, and we've had some really fantastic events and some more coming. So they're the bits I like.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you.
Councillor Sorais. Would any other councillor like to speak to the item? Councillor Marshall.
Stand up.
You can stay seated.
Okay. Look, as Councillor Gauci-Marucci said, the council plan is basically the document that sits above us all and is the
Blueprint.
The blueprint, exactly, and it's the thing by which we should be judged in terms of whether we've achieved what's set out in there. Very briefly, there are a couple of matters, and they're set out in the report for my particular portfolio. There's a few things that are still on track, and we are working towards those. A very important one is the developer contribution plan. And I won't say I feel I can walk away from council, but that will be one of the big things that I can tick off my list of things that I desperately wanted to get done when I sought re-election. And for me, that is an incredibly important piece of work, the idea that if you are developing property within our municipality, then you know what you need to put in to help pay for the infrastructure demands that are created. There are also, as you will see, some significant funding grant achievements that we have received. And look, as Councillor Gauci-Marici referred to, the fact that most of these things are tracking along quite nicely. It's always difficult when you've got so many things you're seeking to achieve to get them done, but I think overall we can be happy with where we are.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Any other Councillor Byrne?
Thank you, Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to, being the Leisure and Active Communities portfolio holder, I just wanted to make note of the glaring 2% that is classified as off track. Which actually isn't as bad as it might particularly seem. So the reason why the East Keilor Leisure Centre is classified as off track is because the Year 1 initiative was to have the detailed design at 50% completion. Detailed design work was scheduled to commence 1st of July 2017. However, this was placed on hold while we were analysing other big projects. Consequently, the appointment of the architect was put on hold until November 2017. In December 2017, the architect advised the designs will be 25% complete by June 30th, 2018, and as such, the project is off track in Q1 and Q2. A project plan has been developed that will enable the project to be delivered within this council term. However, this does not include potential contingencies. So I don't want people to think that because it falls into that 2% of off track that it's not going ahead. It just was off track for a slight period of time, but we'll be right. Thanks.
Minor. Any other councillor? Councillor Nation.
I was going to say, I'd be happy with a 98% or anything, Councillor Byrne. aim high. Just one point, and there is a lot of data and information obviously included in this report, but Council is now going to start publishing these updates as of March 2018 on the Council Plan page of the Moonee Valley website, which will just give residents or users just a good snapshot of what we're doing and where we are on track with the majority of our projects and where we're going forward as a council and where we are and aren't meeting our council plan. And I think that's scheduled to go up obviously after tonight's meeting, and March 2018 is the date that those updates will start hitting the council website.
Any other councillor? Councillor Cusack.
So I think it's on. Mayor and fellow councillors, I just wanted to make a comment that first of all, I think when this was first raised with councillors at some time ago, there was something of a plea that we actually do spend a minute considering this in council, because of the depth and the breadth of work that our officers are involved in and the effort that is being made by so many people that we're supporting the employment of through this council. And while we might be grumpy at times about how things get done and all the rest of it, I think I take a great deal of pride in knowing that our council is addressing the individual needs of many, many, many people. I'm often asked the question as a councillor, what does council do for me? And sometimes it is a bit hard to sort of pinpoint because I don't live in somebody's backyard or in their kitchen and I don't hear what their needs are and all that sort of stuff. But when we do go through the process of listening to what the community's got to say, that horrible word consultation, which can always be improved, and so on like that, and then see it come out through the other end through a report like this, I think we all owe a debt of gratitude to the people who work within this council, who do the planning and those who do the implementing, and hopefully all those who are doing the evaluation at the end, so that we continue to grow and develop the next phase of any of these projects. And just from my own area of interest within council as a portfolio holder, I'm so pleased to see the efforts that are happening in the mental health area, the preventing of violence towards women, and a neighbourhood approach to health and health needs. We often get focused on, giving Johnny or Mary a leg up if they've got a bit of a problem, but in fact, if you change the environment in which they're in, you can go a long way in that space. So, and the other thing that comes through to me is that question of partnerships and strengthening our relationships within Moonee Valley, but also with those other players who are outside of our municipality and across our region and across the metropolitan area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kuza. Any other councillor? Councillor Gauchi-Marucci, would you like to close? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Next item on the agenda is 9.10, the Audit Committee Chairman's Report on page 193. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Gauchi-Marucci.
I'd like to move the officer's recommendation.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Cusack. Councillor Gauchi-Marucci.
Only just very briefly that having been on the committee for a year now, Bruce and the team do some incredible work. They are a fantastic contribution to our community. The level of governance and the audit schedule that they run and the input and due diligence to everything about Moonee Valley has been really eye-opening for me. So I would really like to thank the audit committee for their work and to commend them on the report. So
thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cusack, would you like to say a few words?
Just briefly to echo what Councillor Gauchi-Marucci has just said, but also to suggest that what is happening is that there has been a significant step forward, or some significant steps forward taken within our audit committee that are using previous work as a platform to go forward. And I'm sure that council would agree that what we've seen is some level of not maturation, but it's some sort of level of inventiveness and innovation that is coming into the way our audit committee is working and looking at different aspects of council. So the question about sort of putting a microscope over a whole lot of activities that in the past weren't quite necessarily scrutinised as hard as they could have been. Yes, they were on the horizon, but they were never punched through, are now being folded well and truly into the scope of all of the work of the audit committee, and officers I know have significant understanding of what they've got to do in terms of those checks and balances and making sure that we as a council get the right kind of information.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Any other councillor? Councillor Gauchi-Marucci, would you like to close? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 9.11 is on tonight's agenda, is on page 200, is entitled Financial Performance Report December 2017. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Nation.
Happy to move the officer's recommendation.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Byrne.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Nation, would you like to speak to the financial performance
I
review?
didn't think it was anything controversial. It's again a snapshot, much like the council plan snapshot of where council is in relation to our current budget. We've also got our grant register, which tracks successful, unsuccessful and pending grants and the areas in which we've applied. And there are some green and some red markers on that page. I know I've spoken about it a few times, the red markers on the Victorian School Building Authority Shared Facilities Fund, and the continual work that we need to do as a council to continue to liaise with those schools, whether or not it's through grant applications or otherwise, to try to increase the open space in this municipality, given there's a severe lack of it. There's some other really good successful grant applications in there as well. We love seeing the ones that all state body or federal body contribution and none council. I did note there was one that was about 5,700 council and only 500 from the Department of Education, which we like to see them the other way around, but nonetheless, money is money. We also have in there, obviously, the councillor expenses, which is another way that, through a previous notice of motion from Councillor Marshall, reporting back to the public, back to the ratepayers about how how their funds are being spent. And I am not aware of how it has differed from quarter to quarter, but hopefully residents can see that we are attempting to keep expenses to a minimum, and I know there's been changes around the organisation as well to ensure that we are getting an efficient spend or having an efficient spend of ratepayers' money. Other than that, I don't think there is a lot more to add. Other councillors may touch on the raw figures about where we sit in relation to the budget, but it's all fairly self-explanatory and laid out from page 202 onwards.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Nation, for moving this. You were very comprehensive in what you had to say. I will touch on, again, just in terms of the capital works, this council is undertaking a massive capital works program this year. It includes Overland Reserve, East Kill Leisure Centre design, Boeing Reserve Pavilion, Fairburn Park, Ormond Park. There is just so much going on, and my understanding is the biggest capital works program that Moonee Valley's ever undertaken. So this is obviously going to be to come up in these reports. And we'll continue to talk about them because we're very proud. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor? Councillor Nation, would you like to close? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Next item is 9.12. It's on page 207. Proposed Activities and General Amenities Local Laws 2008 Update. Councillor Marshall.
Thank you, Mayor. You've been very efficient tonight. Mayor, I'd like to move that Council 1 endorse the Proposed Activities and General Amenities Local Law 2018 and the draft Community Impact Statement for the purposes of consultation and to assist with the submission process with the following amendments. 1. Clause 2.1.1h. Any surveillance must be carried out in accordance with the Guidelines to Surveillance and Privacy in the Victorian Public Sector 2017, being a document incorporated by reference into this local law. 2. Clause 4.1.1b. Allow graffiti to remain on their property in accordance with the Graffiti Prevention Act 2017 and Council's graffiti management policy, being a document incorporated by reference into this local law. 3. Clause 5.2. The owner or occupier of any land who keeps bees on that land must register with the Department of Primary Industries and act in accordance with the relevant apiary code of practice, being a document incorporated by reference into this local law. There are notes there, Mayor, but I'm assuming they can just be tabled in relation to...
Yeah.
Yep. And then 4, clause 5.3, any land or structure under 10 square metres used for housing an animal must be maintained in a clean, inoffensive and sanitary condition so as not to cause any nuisance and to the satisfaction of the council or an authorised officer. And then 2, 3, 4 and 5 are as per the officer recommendation.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Nation. Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to the item?
Thanks, Mayor. Look, this is one of the most important things that we'll consider as a council because the council has to review its local law every 10 years and our local law expires in August this year. So local laws really are the ways that we have some control over what goes on in our neighbourhood, and certainly in relation to things that can impact on safety and on amenity issues and around how public areas are used to make sure that they're used appropriately and in a way which doesn't endanger people or is not unfair, if you like. The report actually sets out that there's been some pretty extensive consultation being done to date internally and certainly with other various stakeholders too. But now it's time to put the document out for broader review and for people to have their input. We've changed the format slightly with the hope that it will be able to be a bit more agile over the next 10 years. and a bit more responsive to what are changing and emerging issues, because we all know, you think about things, how they've changed in the past 10 years, we can only begin to imagine what the council in 10 years' time will be dealing with. I'm always fascinated by the things that appear in local laws, and it's worth picking up because you'll find all sorts of strange things where you go, what? There are some of the obvious things, like around the protection of council assets, certainly things around unsightly land and how that's dealt with. We've got issues in there about camping and what you can and can't do when it comes to camping, about unattended vehicles. We've got shopping trolleys, we've got busking, keeping of animals, lighting fires, animal litter, a whole range of really quite important things, but a very diverse collection of things that we deal with in the local law. So I really do strongly recommend that people have a bit of a look at what's proposed. If you think that there is an issue that is not covered that should be covered, then put in a submission. And some of these things that we've included, matters that have actually come out of the previous council and notices of motion. I know a number of that Councillor Nation had put forward in that council, some things that I put up. So it is good to see them being reflected in the local law, and now we'll have that grunt and that ability to enforce behind some of it.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Councillor Nation, would you like to say a few words?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And I think this proposed this draft will be an evolving beast, and it's one of those things that while it seems very uninteresting by nature, most residents have some sort of gripe about council, and local laws are often how these gripes are resolved, and it may be things as simple as cats being out at night or shopping trolleys being left in areas. And that's why actually getting as much consultation on these local laws or on this current draft version of the local laws is really important. Even with having discussions with residents over the weekend, and aligned with a few notice of motion I put up in regards to what we call charity spruikers. I still think we can tighten up the current local laws a little bit more. So, and also along with shopping trolleys and putting the onus back on the actual provider of the trolleys or the people that leave them around. So it's, from a councillor perspective, a really good opportunity to have a look at where you've been stymied by trying to get a result or a resolution for an issue, and our local laws haven't been there to help support you. And then adding to the list and developing this document, which will hopefully, at the end of the day, enable our city to be a better place for our residents to live, and to hopefully not impact their amenity as much. So as dry as a local laws review might sound, it is definitely something for all councillors to think about what else could be in there. Over the weekend I was reading the Monash local laws and seeing what was in there that wasn't possibly in ours, to ensure that these laws, in essence, protect the day-to-day well-being of our residents. So yes, all 4 people on the gallery and people watching online, please send feedback to council, because this actually is a more important issue than some would think it is.
Any other Councillor Byrne?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to reiterate what Councillor Marshall said in terms of the changing and emerging, where we've been in the past 10 years. One thing that I noticed in the local laws was that we're not allowed to undertake any filming on council land without a permit, and I think that used to be fine before smartphones came along. Guilty as charged. I'm not a huge user of Snapchat, but I have used it. I have filmed my daughter on a playground, only my daughter, not other kids. But little things like that, they do need to be updated. It also surprises me that on a lot more than 450 squares, you're allowed to have 40 racing pigeons. But if you're on less than 450 squares, you're still allowed 5 caged birds. So I just find that some of the things are worth noting and potentially putting in some feedback, as the other councillors have mentioned. I've got nothing against birds, but maybe I would if my neighbours... Actually, it is in as racing pigeons, so just I will make that clear. But you're not allowed to have a rooster. You're not allowed to have a rooster. Thank you.
Would any other councillor like to say a few words? I'd just like to mention just a few words. I think maybe Councillor Cusack might remember this, but about 10 years ago, we changed a local law where it actually said to have drinking fountains for horses on every major arterial road. So that was in there. Is it still in there? Or? I think this is. I mean, but I remember removing it. So like you're right, Councillor Marshall. There are things that will be revolving, and I'm sure in 50 years' time, there'll be council sitting here going, what were they thinking, putting that in and taking that out? So anyway, any other councillor like to say a few words? Councillor Marshall, would you like to close? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Council Report 913, Community Facility Management Policy Update. Councillors, do I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I've got a conflict
Oh, yes, you do. That's right. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Sharp.
Move the officer's recommendation.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Serace. Councillor Sharp, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This report is the update for the Community Facility Management Policy. We've had a lot of feedback given to us as groups of councillors, and I'm sure as individual councillors from various groups in the municipality. It's been a difficult issue to address. I don't think anyone would argue with that at all. But the aim in this policy that we put together last year, is really just to make sure that the system of hiring council facilities is fair. It hasn't been entirely fair in the past. Some groups have been able to access council buildings free of charge. Some groups have been paying quite a lot to access council facilities. So in order to make it fair, we have had to implement this policy, which there certainly has been teething problems, and we've been presented in council here from various groups regarding hardship and the group's concerns about how paying for a room or a building, council building, how they're actually going to manage that within their group. So we've spoken a lot. And I know you held a session last year too, I think, with groups. Did you? I think you did. So I'm pleased to see this feedback come to us. And like I said, it has been a very difficult issue to address, but I'm very confident that whilst there are issues and there are groups, I'm confident that council have looked at the particular circumstances of each group. They're all itemised here, regular hires, special circumstances, financial subsidies. So I'm happy to see this report and endorse it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sharp. Councillor Serace.
Thank you, Councillor Sharp, for that information too. It was good to see that actually over these sessions, which were held in October last year, that there were 45 groups and we had over 220 people attending those meetings. So there was a good cross-section of people in the municipality who are users of the halls and from a broad range of community groups across the municipality. So, and we all know that, we have to pull in the purse strings with rate capping, and our opportunities of being able to stretch the dollar further are becoming tighter and tighter. So it's good to see that we've got this management plan up and running, that we've got the community involved, and that we can actually make it fair and equitable for everyone across the municipality.
Any other councillor? Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We have to be mindful in these sensitive areas of community hire of council facilities and non-council facilities as well, that those that are vulnerable, the pensioner groups, the YMCA groups, those that are in need of support, and that takes on various forms, are looked after. I take Councillor Sharp's comment that this has been considered at length, and we've had several consultation sessions in relation to it, and I think that's a great thing. There has been some negative feedback from a few pensioner groups that I've spoken to, who hopefully have been listened to, and that their concerns have been addressed. I haven't heard from them since, so have referred them on, and I'm assuming that that those issues have been taken care of. But it just raises the point that pensioner groups and those groups that are vulnerable, be they seniors groups of varying kind, are looked after and are not forgotten by our municipality, and that we just have a carte blanche effect on everyone, because it doesn't work that way. We're not all equal, unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you look at it. We do have to be mindful that there are those less fortunate in our society who need to be supported. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Any other councillor? Councillor Nation.
Thank you, Mayor, and I think this is again a bit of an evolving beast, in it's come to us in a couple of different forms, and this current form now places a much greater emphasis on those more vulnerable communities, or those groups that are providing services that council doesn't otherwise provide, that have a really important net community benefit. I am glad that we've sort of moved away from one of the initial suggestions, which was to pay for the hire. User groups could apply for a council grant to get money from council to then pay council to use the facility. So I'm glad that that concept has sort of disappeared. Probably for me, and it may be somewhat controversial amongst some councillors, but I still think where we're looking at opening up spaces for community groups, and we're looking at charging community groups for spaces, we need to look at all council spaces, and that includes football pavilions. And that means that maybe football pavilions aren't used every weekend for 18th and 21st, but they might be used for a group paying $4.60 an hour to do a late night movie session for seniors. And I think that until all our facilities are considered equal, and all our facilities are opened up within reason, outside of match days on sporting days, I think that only then will this community facility management policy actually have its full and intended effect. So hopefully the next evolution and the next step will be now looking at each and every one of council's facilities and working out when they're used, when they're not used, and the potential other groups that can utilise those facilities.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Any other councillor? Councillor Cusack.
I just wanted to raise a thought about the motion, actually. It's good to have this report. We had, the report tells me a lot about how the community felt about the initial implementation and the concerns that many people have had. So the next question in my mind is, well, so we get it bedded down for 12 months or so, we get it implemented, and what has the bedding down been like? And that's a query for me. And I'd like to suggest that the recommendation be extended to notes of delivery and outcomes of the doings and that a further report be provided in 12 months or something like that. Depending on the, well, okay, I'll make the kick for 12 months and see whether that flies. But there just seems to me to be a lot more sense in not letting this meander. We are dealing with, as Councillor Lawrence quite rightly points out, really vulnerable people, people who are not often able to speak up for themselves, and when they do, often find other people putting words in their mouths, for instance, and so on like that, which can be a real problem. And if we do settle all this down and sort of say this is exactly as it's going to be for yonks, well, that doesn't take into account the fact that we might have a new Flemington Community Centre in the future, and how is that going to work, etc. So there's that as an issue. I take Councillor Nation's point about sort of all of our facilities and the capacity to use them in much more interesting ways and to meet other needs. And that is then another example of change that's occurring in this space, and another reason to demand for a further report to come through to us, because there are implications for the sporting clubs, notwithstanding your comment that it should be done within reason. And I think that common sense is such a lacking thing so often, but we need to be able to apply that.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Any other councillor? Councillor Sharp, would you like to close?
Just on Councillor Cusack's point, is he requesting an addition to the motion?
Well, if it's a substantial change, I'd be happy to look for a seconder. And,
Or is it an informal amendment?
Ms Pope, would you class it as informal or?
Sorry, Councillor Cusack, could you
I've asked for a further report to come back in 12 months, so to extend the motion and a further report in 12 months' time.
Yep, it is an addition, so if you seek a seconder, that would be fine.
Councillor Goucher-Marich will second that. Councillor Cusack, would you like to speak to the item?
I've done it.
Okay.
I've nailed that.
Okay.
You need to put the votes.
Any other councillor want to speak to it? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. We go back now to the original motion with the addition, and Councillor Sharp, unless anybody else wants to speak on it, can close.
Yep, happy to close with the extra point. Thank you.
I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Could someone get Councillor Byrne back in the room, please? Would anyone just like a 2-minute break? Thank you. 2-minute break. Yeah.
Excuse me, Mr Mayor, I have a conflict in 9.16, so I will vacate.
That's fine. Thank you. I'll need a seconder for that. Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Goucher-Marich, would you like to speak to that?
Just very, very briefly, obviously a little bit of feedback from some traders that indicates some of the traders' associations need to deliver their aims and expectations of all traders across a broader area. So they should take that on board. But that's about it. Thank you.
Point of clarification, are we moving on block?
Yes.
Do we speak to items on block?
No, you can speak to any item that you want to, if you wanted to.
Is that correct? So we...
in regards to the motion to move on block, the comment should be directed to the efficiency of moving on block. Yep.
Not the content.
Not the actual substance of each individual motion. That's fine. No.
Councillor Lawrence.
Only to endorse that it is efficient to move them on block.
Thank you for your efficient comments. Any other councillor would like to make an efficient comment? No? Councillor Goucher-Marich, would you like to close?
No, I think it's efficient.
Okay, I'll put that to the vote. That was an efficient, unanimous decision there. Thank you, Councillor Marucci, for your efficient work. 9.17 is on page 273 and is entitled Response to Notice of Motion, the Skateboard Park at Fanny Street Reserve. Councillors, do I have a motion? And I can see a crutch going up, can I? No?
No, okay, thanks, Mayor.
Councillor Marshall.
Yeah, Mayor, I would like to move that consideration of this report be deferred until the ordinary council meeting to be held 20th of March 2018.
You'd like it deferred?
I would indeed.
Councillor Serace, you seconded. Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to the item? Councillor Serace? Any other councillor? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour?
Sorry, I came in right. I don't know.
No, you're right.
Okay. Deferring 9.17, the skateboard park. You carried unanimously. Councillors, 9.18 is on page 277, notice of motion, the establishment of a community garden. Councillors, do I have a Councillor Marshall.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, I'd like to move something like the officer's recommendation, but I've realised it's missing a couple of words to actually make sense. That council consider the report and implement the option presented for a communal growing space at Walter Street Reserve.
Okay, terrific. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Nation. Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you. This came out of a notice of motion that I put forward towards the end of last year, and about some interest to look at having a community garden at Walter Street. Again, as we know, this is an area that has experienced significant development around the Ascot Chase development, and continues to have some growth around there. And what we have both in Ascot Chase and the enclave, but also around the surrounding areas of Ascot Vale in parts, are properties that have quite small backyards and limited space for growing opportunities. So I've looked at the officer's report, and I think that this is actually a really good way of moving forward, because having that formalised community garden option has some positives and negatives. And to me, this is a great option to have these growing spaces that are open to all, that provide opportunities for all, and to test out how it works. And again, it's that building on that community input into the importance of growing food. And it's something too that I've seen in other municipalities, these kind of growing spaces. And so I think for us, if we can start at Walter Street, I would really like to see us roll out this type of option right across the municipality. I'm sure all of us can think of spaces in our neighbourhoods that have got parks with a bit of dead space, and you can think if you have these lovely, great places to grow fruit and vegetables, what that could do in terms of bringing neighbourhoods together, the opportunities to, again, provide homegrown fruit, vegetables or whatever it might be, herbs. And for me, it's about saying to providing those opportunities for children to get down and see this is what it's like to grow your own food. And we know that one of the challenges that we face as a society is the issue of food security. And I think, again, the more opportunities that we can provide as a council for people to actually grow their own food, the better that we are, the better position we will be in to address those issues of food security. So really, this is a really good way, I think, of addressing the issue that was raised, and I can't wait to see it implemented. And as I said, I hope to see it rolled out across Moonee Valley.
Absolutely. Councillor Nation.
Not much more to add, Mayor, other than also elaborating on the real social element that the community gardens have, and particularly in that area. And I've got plenty of friends who have moved into that enclave estate. And it is a new community, and anything that gets those new residents together and get to know each other, because that area isn't, like many other areas, a long-established area. So in addition to all the fantastic benefits that Councillor Marshall has mentioned, just continuing to create that sense of community down there in what is one of our newer areas and newer communities, I think is really, really important. And people bond over a lot of things, and tending to vegetables and sharing vegetables and having that shared sense of ownership is definitely something that would bring that community together even more.
We could have some bees there too.
There you go.
Any other Councillor Byrne?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I love the idea of this community garden, and it is a little bit of a different way to go about it. We have a couple of quite successful gardens, and I couldn't let this item come onto the agenda without putting in a slight plug for the Avondale Heights Community Garden on River Drive, who have their open day on Sunday. So for the people down here who are looking at starting or getting involved in the community garden, if you want to see how one works and works really well, although slightly different, I would definitely recommend heading down to Avondale Heights and checking out the community garden there. It's great, and also well done to all of the community members who have put so much work into the garden, particularly for the open day. Thanks. 10 till 3, River Drive.
Any other councillor? Councillor Cusack.
We've talked a lot about the potential of this community garden, but we often think in traditional terms. And I look through that long list of what the garden's guidelines for existing and future proposals is, and I wonder how smart that list is, and should it not be more, to use a gardening term, organic, that allows a community to take up the cudgels and describe what it needs and wants. And I think that we need to probably, I would argue, go back to that list of headings, those dot points, and go through them and get some gardeners to work over them. I know we're always worried about risk and things like that, that's fine. But we don't have to, as a council, invest a hell of a lot of money in this caper. A small capital investment creates a lovely ongoing opportunity. And I just sort of think about things. Do the gardens have to always be large? Can we have small ones in small places? Do they always have to be fenced or non-fenced? If you saw Gardening Australia, because I've had a bit of time on my hands over the weekend, Gardening Australia featured a streetscape in Sydney that is totally concrete, and in a very nice suburb, but totally concrete. And what this elderly black chap has done is he's put raised up garden beds, gone down to Bunnings or wherever and bought the damn things, planted them out, put lots of herbs in it. The council came along and put a seat in front of the guy's house. And this place, it's gone off like wildfire. People come along, they tend the garden, they pick what they need, they get herbs for kitchen, whatever they're cooking that night, to throw something in the lasagna, whatever. And it works like that. So gardens don't have to be fenced. They can be things that are run by the community in a very special and loving sort of way. And I think about schools, and I think about children around schools and stuff like that. Also, our gardens should be about demonstration. We have one of the greatest little projects. It's always been around, keeps getting awards, our Small Gardens initiative, and all that work that we've done with Hobson's Bay and so on like that. And how that enthuses people is terrific. That's one form of demonstrations. We can actually work really effectively with all of our community gardens in that world of demonstration and stuff like that. I love the community garden you're talking about, because I love the idea. They all vary and they all have their own characteristics, and what you've got down there is the frog bog, and a great way to solve a problem with excess water, and all those sorts of things. So it's more than anything else, it's about the changing the public use of spaces and making them really inventive and great openings and places to go to. And I mean, my community garden has just built a great big bloody wood-fired oven thingy, and John from Filler Lane, who is a member, brings down half a lamb, chucks it in there, and we just put on a community day for all the locals. And they're all invited in because they smell the smell. Hey? No conflict at all. I just my conflict is I love community gardens, and I note that the wife gave away our bees, our honey, to somebody else when she was coming home from the council from the festival the other day. So we need to keep that sort of stuff going.
Any other councillor? Councillor Marshall, would you like to close?
Look, thank you for those supportive comments. They were fantastic, and this is another example too where we're starting to think about things a bit differently. So just because this is what a community garden in Moonee Valley has always looked like. It doesn't mean that it's what a community garden needs to look like going forward, and that's why I'm really pleased with this recommendation of the officers. Pleased that councillors are speaking supportively. As I said, for me the challenge is to see we roll this out as much as we can throughout Moonee Valley.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Council Report 919 is Notice of Motion Quarterly Reports. Councillors, do I have a mover? Councillor Marshall.
I'll move a motion in the form of the officer's recommendation.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Serace. Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to the item?
Look, it's really procedural and a report on our notices of motion, so I think the report says it all.
Councillor Serace. Any other councillor? Councillor? Yeah, Chimirucci.
Neither to speak for nor against, but just to note, which I've already had discussions with the CEO, but the notice of motion from 23 May against me is closed, but there's a small part of it that's still outstanding. So,
okay, thank you.
That's all.
Any other councillor? Councillor Marshall. Would you like to close? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Item 10 is the notice of motions. Councillors, next item is we have 3 notices of motion listed for tonight. Therefore, I call on Councillor Marshall to present her first notice of motion entitled Transparency Measures.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, I would like to move that the following actions be undertaken as soon as practical or as otherwise indicated to ensure that Council engages in best practice with regards to governance, accountability and transparency in its decision making. 1, undertake a review of the way in which council meetings are conducted in order to improve public participation and engagement. 2, by the date specified or otherwise May 2018, provide online access to the following information via the council website under a separate governance and transparency tab as on from the commencement of the current council term unless otherwise specified. A, property lease register. B, register of delegations as per sections 87(1) and 98(4) of the Local Government Act. Register of authorised officers under section 224 of the Local Government Act. D, councillor and staff travel register. E, election campaign donations. F, all donations, payments and grants made by council under the Community Support Framework. G, submissions received under section 233 of the Local Government Act. H, register of annual salaries for senior officers, including the Chief Executive Officer. I, register of authorised officers under section 188 of the Planning and Environment Act. J, councillor gift register. K, council submissions made to third parties. L, conflict of interest declarations for councillors. M, as soon as practicable after the adoption of the 2018-19 council budget, a list of future tender opportunities including proposed advertising period. N, open space contributions, including the contribution total as at the commencement of this council term and on a postcode basis, the contributions made each financial year. O, the address of all council-owned properties valued in excess of $500,000. P, as soon as practicable after the commencement of the 2018-19 financial year, a list of major service contracts above $750,000, including a description of the service provider and the services provided. Q, other contributions made by planning permit applicants pursuant to the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme in connection with a planning permit. R, a list of corporate sponsorships received by council. S, with effect on and from the execution of the next contract of a CEO, the CEO's contract of employment and salary details. For the avoidance of doubt, this does not include the current contract of Brian Lancaster. And 3, that the information disclosed pursuant to point 2 be updated no less frequently than every quarter other than 2S, which should be disclosed upon execution of each new contract.
Councillor Nation, would you like to second that? Councillor Marshall, are you sure you haven't missed anything? Would you like to speak to the item?
Do you want to tempt me?
No. Would you like to speak?
Thank you. Look, it is a very comprehensive list, Mayor, and I do acknowledge that. As the officer comments in relation to the notice of motion indicate, a lot of this is information that we do have publicly available or is otherwise reported, and this is about making sure it's very clear where this information is and it's easy for people to find. For me, this is probably the final, at this stage anyway, in a series of notices of motion that I have put forward which have been designed to improve accountability and transparency at Moonee Valley. And certainly, as we know, the councillor expenses was one, which was not without its controversy, but that has been implemented, and I think that has been positive because people can see this is how we spend money, and it's as simple as that. Certainly the introduction of live streaming, while it probably went beyond what I initially contemplated, I think it's fair to say that this has set a really positive standard. And again, it was something that took a couple of goes to get across the line, and I acknowledge the support of new councillors too for that, which was positive. Also, we had previously the introduction of the recording of councillor votes. We all know the old system where you had the lovely division process, which was, it's fair to say, probably not in the best interest of good decision making, but anyway, they're all things that have changed, and now to me this is that icing on the cake, if you like, and if this is actually implemented, it will really put us up there as one of, if not the most transparent council in the whole of Victoria, and I think that that is something to aspire to, and that is something that we will be able to be proud of. I know that there was some concern expressed in relation to the CEO contracts going forward. I really thought quite deeply about this one and thinking, all right, well, what's the purpose and what's the potential detriment, as I did for all of the particular issues. And I think, look, the reality is any potential CEO of Moonee Valley just has to Google Moonee Valley, and you know our history. There's no point pretending otherwise. I think, obviously, and one thing that needs to be made clear, but I hope it does, that if there was personal information such as the CEO's address, that would certainly not be expected to be publicly disclosed. And I'll say this now on the record so we don't have any uncertainty, because I'm mindful about the privacy implications, and that sort of information is just not needed. But for me, I actually wonder whether it might have a positive impact, because let's be honest, being the CEO of a council is a very difficult job, and it's a hard job at times. And if there is a clear expectation of the CEO as set out in their contract, then we all know what the measures are, and there might be probably a bit more understanding from people how things actually work. So I think that's probably all I need to say at this stage, but certainly for me this is just simply about improving transparency. It's about improving accountability, and I think these are really important steps, so to be able to turn around and say we've got nothing to hide at Moonee Valley.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Councillor Nation.
Thank you, Mayor, and I commend Councillor Marshall for this notice of motion, and I know it's probably been 6 or 8 or even more months in the making, and trying to get a motion that reflects the evolving nature of local government. Plenty of these and most of the items listed in this notice of motion are available if you come in to the Civic Centre and sign a bit of paper and sit in an office and read through the documents. But the reality is, much like how we've implemented live streaming, that these are documents that are readily available. We should make them readily available for people who don't have to drive into the Civic Centre to read them. I thank Councillor Marshall for incorporating my suggestion of the governance and transparency tab. So when people are seeking these documents, they're not all located in different areas of the website, and the majority or all of the items are things that we are required to report on or are required to submit to council, that we declare in the chambers, such a conflict of interest, that we submit via the gift registry. And I do agree with Councillor Marshall that the more readily this information is made available, the less implications it will have on council, that we may be stuck in positions that we don't want to be in. And in reality, at the end of the day, even if it comes down to council paying grants to organisations, council reimbursing councillors for items, councillors receiving gifts, these items need to be documented, and the community that might only be the 1% that are interested need to be able to view that information, and it's only going to make us look better by not having anything to hide. So I think this is an excellent, I was going to say next step, but excellent final step. There will obviously be probably little things that are added here and there, but particularly in the past 5 or 6 years, this council has really evolved into one that's really leading in this space, hopefully, and one that other councils will look to and say, well, look what they're doing. They're putting this information online. It's actually not hindering their operation, but making it a more efficient and productive local government organisation.
Councillor Thrice.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move an amendment to the motion. I totally support what Councillor Marshall has put forward, but for the sake of transparency and accountability, whether Councillor Marshall, or I'll move this as an amendment to the motion, and that is to add item 2T, which reads publication of councillor memberships of sporting organisations, community organisations and political parties, and item 2U, to publish councillors' register of interests, in brackets, which includes property holdings in and outside the municipality in the documents to be made public.
Anybody like to second that?
I'll second. Can we discuss each one?
Okay.
I'll second for discussion.
Up to you, Councillor Thrice.
Okay, so the reason for my addition to all the items that Councillor Marshall has submitted forward is that I guess if we're going to be totally accountable and totally transparent with everything that's been put before us, there too are the matters that I believe that should be addressed as well. So I think council memberships of sporting organisations, community organisations and political parties, I think that makes it clear and concise and precise to the community of where we sit. In relation to the publication of councillors' register of interests, which would include property holdings in and outside the municipality, and those documents to be made public, I think also leads to transparency across the municipality of the councillors.
Yeah, point of clarification.
So I'm just not clear. What would the holding of a property holding outside the municipality have to do at all with the business of Moonee Valley?
I think it just gives an address, or it gives a particular outcome to people's understanding where councils. I know that it's state and federal government that's a criteria that has to be done. I'm just following through at local government.
Sorry. And when you say membership of so for example, my children play netball at a netball club, would that be something that you would expect?
It's councillor memberships, not children. It's councillor memberships.
I just don't see the point. I'm appreciating that you're trying, yep, but I just, probably... Yes, sorry, Mayor. I don't have the floor, do I?
I have no problem with the first item and the memberships. As someone who's a member of a political party, I don't think it's a hidden secret. But the second one, I question the need to declare property outside our electorate.
Yes.
So,
Any other
is it possible to just split them in the...
Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I guess if it's good enough for our state and federal colleagues to declare all interests they have in property throughout Australia and I think internationally, if I'm not wrong, tell me if I'm barking up the wrong tree there, then the transparency is quite open and honest in their regard, and maybe it just needs to extend. And if we are going to be pace setters and government best practice for local government in Victoria, as Councillor Marshall pointed out, then this would only endorse that fact and bring us into line with our federal and state colleagues. So
Yes, unfortunately,
that's so we're only addressing the amendment at this stage, Mr Mayor, are we not?
That's correct, yeah.
So I won't make any further comment.
Councillor Marshall.
I was just, again, I wonder, I hope I haven't explained it poorly, and perhaps I have, because, sorry, was that a contribution or not? Sorry, I just missed. Apologies if that was a contribution I missed. So transparency measures are about thinking about things that might affect how our decision making in Moonee Valley occurs. And so the idea, and I mean, you've been quite transparent, councillors, in why you would raise this. I've got no issue with political parties at all, but I think it should be political party membership over the past 10 years.
Yeah, fine.
Or have you ever been a member of a political party? And if so, disclose it. So, that's for me. Neither here nor there, I'm happy to support that one, certainly. But what would a property holding outside of the municipality have to do at all with your decision making in Moonee Valley? I just don't understand it, and I'd love a councillor to explain that to me.
Well,
So I'm asking for a point of clarification.
Just one. I'll step out of the chair, and can you just come into the chair for a minute, because I wouldn't mind saying a few words on this.
Yeah, just do it as
You're not
mayor.
moving a motion.
Yeah.
You can speak for that.
Yes.
I tend to fully agree with what Councillor Lawrence said about the transparency of the state and federal members, but you've got to understand the decisions that they actually make decisions that are Australia-wide or international. There's only very, very few little decisions that councils make internationally, and the only one I can really think of is Likazar. Now, my chicken farm in Croatia, what's that got to do with Likazar? I just don't see the connection there, And look, I agree. Everything within Moonee Valley, I agree, because 95% of our decisions are made within Moonee Valley, and a few maybe outside. But if we were making decisions for Victoria or Australia or international policies or trans-Pacific decision making, yes, totally agree, and I agree with the political parties too. So I'll step back in the chair.
Just a point of clarification, in terms of within Moonee Valley, how I'm concerned about that, to be honest, because I wouldn't necessarily want people to know my address, my street address or whatnot.
Okay, it's
Agree
not,
entirely.
seeking your address. It says register of interests, including property holdings in and outside the municipality.
That's your address.
So property holdings being...
In and outside the municipality.
Clarification, doesn't the state one just say in Essendon, not in my street in Essendon?
Well,
Don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I can share your concerns.
Let me just bring the argument back. I need to formalise this now, because we've all had a bit of a say about it. So what we'll do is we'll go with. Do you want to say you haven't said anything yet, have you, Councillor Sharp?
Yeah, sorry, no, I haven't said anything, Mr. Mayor. Look, I would be happy with the first point of Councillor Serace's potential alternative, but I have serious concerns about point 2, and I think it's completely unnecessary. I'm not a state politician. I don't make any local laws, make any planning decisions outside of Moonee Valley. I don't want to be a state politician. I'm quite happy being here, and I don't think that personally I should be disclosing my personal, even my personal address. I just think that's just going too far. So I don't know if Councillor Serace would split the...
Yeah, look, I'm
Councillor
happy.
Serace-
The intent was not to expose people's home addresses. That's not what the intent was. It was just about register of interest, and it was just something that had come...
So just for clarification, Councillor Serace, could you just read the first
First
point
one? Yeah.
that you wanted
So to add item 2T, which reads, publication of councillor memberships of sporting organisations, community organisations and political parties. And I'm happy to add that in political parties prior to and whilst being over the last 15 years?
2000?
Ever. Okay, ever is fine.
If it's probably not the right word, though.
Oh, well,
Um,
political parties,
Have they ever been, disclosure if they have ever been a member of a political party?
past and present.
And political party memberships, and any political party memberships at any point in time.
Ever, yeah.
Okay.
Everyone you're married to.
Yeah.
separate the two. Which ones?
No, just political parties.
I'll just get
at
some
any point in
clarification
time.
from the CEO. Mr Lancaster would like to say a few words.
I'd suggest that maybe you put the item 2T first and then deal with the next one after that.
Okay.
Okay.
So I'll just make sure that I've got the wording on this correct. 2T, publication of council memberships of sporting organisations, community organisations and political parties during
Political party
Parties.
memberships at any time.
party memberships,
At any time.
past and present. Past and present.
Okay,
If,
so
if you say that out, that won't make sense.
So just clarification, Mr Mayor, is that to apply to all sporting clubs that I've ever been involved in?
No,
since
political
I've been,
parties.
political parties.
No,
Well,
only
it's-
political
Because
parties.
it's all written in
past
the
and
one
present.
paragraph, so it's not very clear as to what's actually it applies to.
Again, is it within the municipality?
Within the municipality,
So all sporting clubs that you have
Within the municipality.
yes.
Well,
Should we, it's not do
what
standing
about
orders?
donation?
Sorry?
I think that's
Oh,
going
Mr
too
Mayor, would you
far.
like me to
Anyway,
suspend standing
I'll
orders?
suspend standing orders to get this sorted out.
I think that's gone too far. Personally.
Well, and adjourn it. Yeah. Councillors, who can someone put up a motion to bring back from suspending orders? Thank you,
I'd like to
Councillor
move-
Marshall.
yeah,
Councillor Byrne.
can't even get that out.
Sorry.
We resume.
Yeah. What we'll do is we'll put Councillor Soares, can you read what
Yes, I
your
will. Okay, so there's been a change to what I wish to move. So 2T, which says publication of council memberships of incorporated sporting organisations and community organisations within the municipality, and 2U, membership of political parties past and present. If you
Okay,
want
I'll put
vote.
that to the vote. Just have it,
And-
actually, you have a seconder for that, sorry, that's right. Councillor Gauchi-Marucci will second that. Would you like to speak to the item?
I'm happy to have both those two items voted upon separately, Mr Mayor, if that's going to
We'll do it together.
do it together. Okay, as I said earlier, in relation to transparency and being open and accountable for everything that's in the previous items as listed by Councillor Marshall, these were just a couple that I felt were missing off the list, that there has been certain misunderstandings, I guess, in the past about people's affiliations and whatever with political parties, and I think that if we're going to be open about any memberships, council or memberships of incorporated sporting organisations and community groups within the municipality, I think that also just adds to the list of everything else that we're being open and transparent about.
Thank you. Would any other councillor like to speak to the item?
I would.
Councillor Marshall.
Thank you, Mayor. And look, I find it fascinating in the context of a motion about transparency. I have circulated this motion no less than, 3-4 times, to the point where I'm sure you are absolutely sick of seeing this motion. You know, I've asked for councillor input repeatedly, and Councillor Nation, thank you for your input, and Councillor Byrne also input. I've had officer comments. There have been so many opportunities for councillors to have input in relation to this notice of motion. So you will be, I'm sure, surprised like I am that the first we are hearing about these concerns are on the floor. And that's when you start wondering why people are doing things. And for me, that's what this is about. It's just about thinking, you know what? If we're going to work together as a cohesive team, these sorts of stunts are things that are not helpful. So in terms of the political party, no issue with that at all. I've never tried to hide what I am or who I am, unlike, you know, perhaps others may not have been quite as transparent about their membership of political parties. So I've got absolutely no issue with that at all. In fact, I think that that should be compulsory question when people stand for local government. Not just now, have you ever been a member of a political party? So you know what, if you're a member of the Communist Party at once upon a time, then there you go, that's disclosed for the world to know. I didn't say there was, Councillor Cusack, didn't say there was at all. The issue around memberships of community organisations. Now we know we've got Rotarians here, we know we've got people who play tennis, who swim, who maybe once upon a time, or still probably kick footies. I want to be generous, I'm not sure whether, you know.
Badminton.
Badminton. But it's thinking about what is the purpose of this when the Local Government Act makes it clear if you're an office holder in relation to a community organisation, that takes you to a different sphere. But if you are just a community person like so many of us are, involved in things because our kids are members or whatever it might be, I do wonder what the purpose of this is, because the purpose has not been clearly explained. So, you know, perhaps maybe in debate someone will be able to elaborate and be able to provide some clarity for me, because I'm missing that clarity at this stage as to what the exact purpose of that provision is. And as I said, the astonishing thing to me is that after this being on the cards for 6 months, for this being circulated to councillors repeatedly saying, please give me your comments, that this is the point in time at which we find out about all this sort of stuff. So, you know, transparency and accountability, sort of makes you wonder whether people understand what those words mean.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Any other councillor?
Stephen, I second it. Can I actually speak to it?
I thought, okay, sorry. Didn't you speak to us? Sorry.
I knew you were passionate and you wanted to get in. That was fine.
Okay, I'll allow it.
I firstly am glad that the previous point you has disappeared, because that probably went a fraction too far. For me, I think, again, not dissimilar to Councillor Marshall, everyone knows my memberships. I am completely open and transparent about them, and I declare them every 6 months to council anyway. So for me, I don't think me declaring my municipal community groups or sports clubs, be that the VRC or Strathmore Rotary, is any more than showing that there is no perceived conflict of interest as well. And political parties, everyone knows I'm a political party member, so I think if no one's got anything to hide, there's nothing wrong with this. That's my personal. If you've got something to hide, then there's a difference. But
Councillor Nation.
Just seeking a point of clarification, the reference to the sporting organisations, are we just, for the black and white purpose of this, are we just saying incorporated associations?
That's what I said.
So not no, because it said the motion said sporting, sporting incorporated association. So just so there's no black and or grey area after the fact, are we having listed from the start of this term of council the incorporated associations that we are members of?
But I moved incorporated sporting organisations.
No, but I'm just querying why the necessarily need for sporting, because again, that's a grey area. Is it an incorporated association under the Incorporated Associations Act 2012 or whenever it was 1989, but they've got the new 2016. Yeah, we had to redo all the rules. So there's no grey area. I have no issue with the with declaring sporting affiliations, because I walk out with conflict of interest all the time, obviously through the swimming club. But it just needs to be black and white. Is it an incorporated association that we're declaring, or is it something else? And then it gets into that whole grey area. I don't think.
So, are you asking a question for an answer?
I'm asking why. I'm saying that the point T, incorporated sporting organisations. Why is it sport? Why just sport?
If you'd prefer that I take out the word incorporated.
No. That's not the
sporting.
Do you mean you should say incorporated sporting and community?
No, so with community groups, you're an incorporated association, or you're an unincorporated association. That's the two black and white parts. So that up there, incorporated sporting organisations. I don't know why it's just picking on sporting organisations and not other incorporated. So it just needs to be publication of councillor memberships of incorporated associations, because that's the technical term under the Incorporated Associations Act 2016.
I'm happy to change it to
But,
that.
excuse me, as a point of clarification.
Sorry, keep.
And apologies, because this is hardly satisfying from a number of measures. But what is the point? What are you trying to have disclosed?
Just the transparency of councillors' associations.
Sorry, that wasn't my question. Apologies if I'm being unclear. What are you seeking to have disclosed? So if a councillor is a member of a tennis club, you want that put on the public record. If someone is a member of a local footy club, if someone is a member of a sewing group, is this the information you want disclosed? Because it's not the slightest bit clear from what's up there.
Only really on incorporated associations, so they would be major.
What's the distinction for
organisations.
you, as Mayor, if you don't mind me? Just what's the distinction? What is it about incorporated associations for you that makes those ones that require transparency but unincorporated associations not? As a matter of policy that you are putting forward.
Okay, so with our discussions, I was of the understanding that that was something that was wanting to be in the motion.
No, sorry, I was asking
Incorporated
you,
into
so,
the
as someone
motion.
proposing this amendment, I don't understand the purpose.
I'm going to stop this.
Sorry.
What we're going to do now is, I personally believe that this needs further discussion because we're not sure exactly what Councillor Sorais wants us to do and what she's seeking in this. So my suggestion would be for item T to be withdrawn, we go back to the original motion, and then Councillor Sorais should come back to council with a separate notice of motion to incorporate whatever she's talking about. And we can have a frank, with T, and then we can have a frank discussion to exactly know what she is trying to make transparent. So we've got a motion on the books now, and I think we should just go back to the original. So what I'll do, I'll let Councillor Sorais close, and then we'll go to the vote. On the amendment, yeah.
I would have liked to have had...
Oh, sorry,
Yeah,
Councillor
yeah.
Cusack
Yeah, me.
and Councillor Sharp.
Well, one thing that really worries me about Councillor Sorais's thing is motion in relation to T is that it is all-encompassing a little bit and totally leaving out lots of others. The whole notion of voluntary capacity, what about that? If I volunteer with an organisation on a regular basis, aren't I conflicted?
No.
Well, no, I'm not. And until I stand up in a council meeting and say, well, X is being discussed and I volunteer with them, I think I might have perceived conflict, I leave the room. Local Government Act. It's the same in the Local Government Act in respect of participation in groups versus that thing about being a part of the executive. It's already there. Now, you can go on forever and ever, because I can tell you that I'm a member of many, many groups in this community. Now, some are incorporated, most of them are incorporated, but I'm not sure at what point this makes any sense. I mean, is this just an idle chit-chat thing? Maybe we should put this in our bios on the website. I don't know. I'm not sure where this is going to. I'm happy enough with the notion about political parties, past and present, because I've always been happy to discuss my viewpoint and what is my moral compass and what are the things that direct me in my thinking and what is the deep down stuff about me. And happy to talk about how I arrived at those positions over many, many years. But if I want to go down and play bowls on a Saturday afternoon, I have to join a club. I don't have a choice. I can't go and just play, social stuff forever. I want to do that. But then all of a sudden now there's some sort of thing about that. Well, if there was a question about my bowls club coming up, as per the last community grants, where I walked out and stood out for several discussions around that, I find it difficult to conceive that you have to do everything. And most organisations are incorporated now. There's very few that aren't, because they became quite in 2016 when Consumer Affairs Victoria cast its net. It cast a very, very wide net and pulled in many, many organisations. I'm just a little bit lost, frankly, into where that goes. And as I said, where do you stop? I'm a volunteer. All volunteers are out of bounds now.
Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I take real offence, excuse me, Councillor Gatchametri, but I take real offence when a councillor sits around a table and says, if any councillor doesn't support whatever, albeit this motion, they've got something to hide. I can tell you right now, I have never been a member of a political party and never will be. And to my knowledge, I'm not actually a membership. I don't have any memberships at the moment. So I'm pretty much a clean skin. But I've been around long enough to be able to work out when things don't make sense. And I cannot support this motion because it doesn't make sense. But I want it on record that I take real offence when councillors are earmarked in such a way like that without listening to any reason and just saying, if you don't support whatever, you've got something to hide, or you're doing this or you're doing that. It's not right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sharp.
Can I retract that comment?
No,
That wasn't the
no.
spirit it was intended with, so I retract. Sorry.
I will now go to Councillor Sorais to close the argument,
Okay.
and then we'll vote on it.
Okay, well, based on the conversation that's come forward, I'm quite happy to remove 2T and just and leave 2U, which becomes 2T, and delete 2T. 2U becomes 2T, if the seconder would agree to that. So all we've got up there is publication,
Don't have a seconder for that.
publication and membership of political parties, past and present.
Is whatever, or so that you're seconding it,
I seconded for discussion in the first place. I'll second it for discussion again.
guys. Whatever is not a seconder. I say let's get serious here. I'm getting a little bit tired of this gamemanship. Okay, so we've got a seconder.
Yes.
All right, what I'll do is I'll now put it to the vote. All those in favour of Councillor Sorais' amendments, put your hands up.
With the publication of political parties as the addition.
All those for is Councillor Sorais, Councillor Gauci. All those against?
Councillor Sharp, Councillor Nation, Councillor Marshall, Councillor Sypek, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Cusack.
And all those who abstained? Did you vote before? Sorry, you voted for. Okay, apologies. Motion is lost. We go back to the original motion to Councillor Marshall.
Marshall.
Look, I honestly don't know what to say, but for anyone out there watching this, this is a good demonstration in dysfunctionality. And Chair, I admire your ability to try and chair in these types of circumstances, because councils can only work well together if, as others have said, if there's trust and if there is a level of cohesion. There are not these little stunts. And as you know, I said, I've got nothing to hide either, but I certainly agree with Councillor Sharp's point. This whole thing that unless you vote my way, you've got something to hide, or you're not supporting the community. It has been wheeled out lately. It is just offensive. I don't know how we move on from here as a council. We've got a lot of work to do, we really do. That people could take something like this, as I said, and just try and make a stunt for their own ends. It's just, you know, when there were multiple opportunities to try and have input. Just what do you do? How do you resolve these issues? How do you get councils to work together well so we are good decision makers, so we can put the interests of the community first? That's for me where I just find at the moment we are just so far from that it is just astonishing. And despite all the best attempts of officers and others to try and resolve these issues, they are just very deeply embedded, and we have got a lot of work to do.
Who seconded that originally?
I did.
Councillor Nation did. Yeah, Councillor Nation did. Yeah.
It's closed.
That was closed.
Close. Okay. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Councillor Sorais?
Councillor Sorais. Councillor Sharp.
It's unanimous. It's
Councillor Nation. Sorry, I didn't see you, Councillor Nation.
Unanimous.
Apologies.
Thank you. Next item is 10.2, the establishment of a working group of the City of Melbourne councillors. Do I have a motion? Councillor Marshall.
Mayor, I would like to move that the CEO write to Mr. Ben Rimmer, CEO of the City of Melbourne, and I would like to insert the words to and the City of Melbourne councillors requesting the establishment of a working group. Sorry. Would you like me to read it out again, or happy?
No, that should be
Yep.
fine.
Councillors, officers and community members from the City of Moonee Valley and the City of Melbourne to consider 1. Options to improve connectivity from Royal Park to the Flemington Racecourse, and 2. Opportunities for cohesive planning along Racecourse Road as the shared boundary between the two municipalities.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Cusack. Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to your notice of motion?
Look, I will, and I think in some ways this is quite an obvious notice of motion, and I'm sure the reasons are very clear. At the moment, we have a shared boundary in Racecourse Road with the City of Melbourne, and you have that sense that we're going along looking after our side of the road, and the City of Melbourne are going along looking after their side of the road, and you just have to look at how they are developing differently. For me, I've got some concerns about that lack of cohesion. We have lots of challenges on and near that shared boundary, and certainly obviously we've got the proposed Flemington public housing redevelopment, the Arden Macaulay structure plan, which for anyone who goes in and around Kensington, North Melbourne, there are going to be enormous amounts of development in and around there, and obviously a new metro station. So we need to be able to think about these things, and we need to be able to think about too how you get that east-west connection along Racecourse Road, because at the moment it just doesn't work. I'm not the only councillor, we all are around there when the events are on, and you just have to see what the traffic is like. You just have to see that inability for pedestrians and cyclists to have safe accessibility. So these are the types of things that I would think that this shared group would do. We've all got obviously expertise on our part of the world, and City of Melbourne officers, councillors and community members have expertise and knowledge about the other side of the road, if you like. And I think it's now that time to come working together because of these extensive challenges we are going to face. And we've spoken about the importance of advocacy and about the importance of actually being able to go to, whether it be state or federal government, as a cohesive group and say, you know, this is what we need. And I honestly think that if we can jointly lobby, jointly advocate for projects which will benefit the area together, I really think that our power will be much improved, and the ability to get outcomes will be much improved.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Councillor Cusack.
Thank you, Mayor. I certainly support the whole motion. I might actually ask Councillor Marshall if she's interested in just a slight amendment.
No, please.
To 2. It's planning along Racecourse Road and the remaining shared boundary between the two municipalities.
That's fair enough.
And the remaining shared boundary between the two municipalities. Because that goes down to the racecourse, down to the showgrounds, and also to the back where we have relationships with the racecourse there.
That's entirely consistent with that motion. That, to me, that does not make any changes at all. That is just slightly clarifying what it is. So I'm happy for that to be accepted informally.
So I just want to Racecourse Road and the remaining shared boundary.
Okay, fine. You finished speaking?
This is
you started.
So we're just doing that as an informal, aren't we? This is well, as Councillor Marshall has already pointed out, there are a number of important planning issues that relate to Racecourse Road, and the connection along Racecourse Road and going right up towards the zoo. We have things like Flemington Bridge Station. We have the overpass there for the cycling and walking and all the rest of it. But we also know that there are possibilities, if we're really smart about thinking about how the people from the Flemington Flats move into and use resources that are part of the City of Melbourne. And so therefore the partnerships that we're talking about, or the scope of this committee, would also go to things that aren't just about planning, but could also be a forum where councillors and at that very high level are coming to, and officers at that very high level are coming together to talk about critical matters where shared effort, shared knowledge and shared experience can all be put on the table. We have some small examples of that already with the Showgrounds Consultative Committee and so on like that. And I know that officers meet with officers at officer level to discuss matters and so on like that. However, there are critical issues of policy and that higher level thing where we want to bring in other players to it. And so if we're going to advance advocacy, if we're going to advance partnerships and collaboration, we need to get something of a committee of this order that Councillor Marshall has proposed. It's not a difficult sort of thing. Obviously, ward councillors would have a finger in the pie, and we'd also need to work closely with the CEO on all of this. But our the objective in this is to get the best things out. And can I say that we have got a looming issue, just to focus your mind on this. We've worked very, very hard on Racecourse Road between the railway station and going east, and all of those shops. A lot of them are heritage. We're looking at that as a whole village type of thing. But the one property that was ceded to the City of Melbourne is the old Quiet Man Hotel, is to be turned into a 9-storey block of flats on the corner of Rankin Road. Now, if you're coming up Racecourse Road, you've got what we're preserving, and you've got this bloody blot on the landscape for the future. And we had no input to that. We had no real discussion with them. They just did it. I'm hopeful that a committee like this would avoid that sort of ridiculous outcome.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Any other councillor? Marshall, take the vote.
Would like to say more, but I think I'll shut up.
Okay, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour?
Councillor Sharp, Councillor Nation, Councillor Marshall, Councillor Sypek, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Cusack, Councillor Gauci-Marici.
All those against? All those abstain?
Councillor Lawrence.
Okay. We go to the next item on the agenda. It's a request for the introduction of Moonee Valley City Council Waste Calendar. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, the decision was made late last year not to print and distribute our annual waste calendar in the form that it had been in over the past number of years. Residents got a much more condensed version with details on it, but with basic details on it. But I received a lot of feedback from various people in the community. They were bailing me up in the supermarket and walking down the street. And at first, I didn't actually realise that we weren't sending them out. So I expected to get one in my letterbox too, and never received it. So once we found out that they weren't being distributed, I decided to bring this report to us just so we could have a look at the costings, because I understand why the decision was made. But look, at the end of the day, it's a calendar. But so many people said to me, and this, this isn't how council operates, obviously, but so many people have said to me, the only thing you give me is a calendar. And now you're not even giving me that. Now, obviously, we know we do much more work than that. But a lot of members in the community, especially the elderly, they just rely on that calendar so much. It's just the daily thing that they look at for whatever they need to look at. So it has been surprisingly, well, not really surprisingly, but yeah, I guess the impact of not having it has surprised me. I didn't expect to have that many complaints, and I noticed on Facebook, on council's Facebook page, where there's visitor posts, or there used to be visitor posts, a lot of people were asking about where it is and why they haven't got it and all the rest of it. So Hence this notice of motion, just to look at it, just to see if we can potentially bring it back for next year and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you. Second, Councillor Gauchi-Marucci. Microphone.
Yes,
Mine's
I will
on.
second it.
Mine's on. Would any other councillor like to speak to the item or the second? Councillor Byrne.
Thank you. I'll make this quick. Thank you, Councillor Sharp, for bringing this. First of all, to my attention that there was a calendar. I just want to represent being voted in as someone who didn't know about this calendar. In saying that, I also checked on online on the Moonee Valley website, and there were heaps of comments. So obviously a lot of people really do enjoy this calendar, but there are obviously people who just look up the calendars on their phones as well. So potentially going forward, it might be that there's a whole stack printed and people can ring up and get them. It would be really interesting to see what this report comes back with, because having you flagging this and being able to look into it a bit more, I've noticed that you're right, so many people absolutely love their calendars, and it's something that we can consider doing, but there's also people that didn't know they existed. Thank you. But I do my recycling.
Thank you, Councillor Byrne. Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, the calendar is a handy device for those that don't know whether it's the green, yellow or red bin. It's always the red bin, of course, but the other two. And particularly for the elderly, I guess, they're always referring back to the paper copies of things rather than digital. I was just thinking, whilst you were referring to it, that we also produce a business calendar here at Moonee Valley, and there's obviously repetition in 2 calendars, or there might be even 3 for all I know, coming out of Moonee Valley, since Councillor Byrne didn't even know about the bin calendar. Well, there's also a business calendar. So there might be an opportunity for incorporating all into the one document, or one calendar as it were, and saving a cost across the board. So I'll just put that forward for something to be considered by council officers.
Thank you. Any other councillor? Councillor Cusack.
Voice my support for the motion.
Thank you.
Can I go on record and just say that to all the lovely older people that use the pool in the morning, that I've told them their calendars are on their way, that they're not on their way until next year. So I will put on record that I categorically apologise for saying your calendars are on their way. Technically they're on their way, but they're on their way for 2019.
Point of clarification, my understanding is that there was actually calendars printed that were just smaller and on one piece of paper, so you could get them those calendars, just not the nice big
What
glossy
Sam
ones.
said, agreed.
Any other councillor? Councillor Sharp, would you like to close? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Next item on tonight's agenda is urgent business. Councillors, do we have any items of urgent business? No? Okay, before I go to item 12, ladies and gentlemen and councillors, I just want to make a statement. I think I've been very lenient as a mayor in regards to the way these meeting procedures have been going. And Councillor Marshall, I do disagree with you. We are not a dysfunctional council. I think we're all highly intelligent. We are all highly motivated. We all do care for our city. But when we start getting into like petty little point scoring plays like this, and surprises, that is not how councillors behave. We are here as councillors. We have a stewardship to the city of Moonee Valley, not just to our own little pockets that we live in or we just hang out with. We are responsible, and we have to look after all 120,000 plus people in the city of Moonee Valley. So if this pettiness keeps continuing, I'll be taking different actions, and I'll be running this meeting a lot stricter, a lot harder, and I won't give you the freedom that I've been giving you up to now. So please, I'm just asking you for your cooperation, because we are a good council. Thank you. Next, Confidential reports. The next item of business is confidential reports and councillors. We have 4 confidential reports this evening. Councillors, do I have a motion that we go into camera to consider the matters which contain informal narration of the legal advice? Councillor Marshall, Councillor Nation. I'll put...
As you're moving into this, my lift has arrived.
Done. You please go. Thank you for your time, Councillor Cusack. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you, gallery.